Daniel Rourke first suspected Nadia on a Thursday night, the kind of night when his flagship restaurant looked perfect from the dining room and strained from the inside. Crystal glasses flashed under warm light, butter hissed on the line, and guests in pressed jackets laughed over plates that cost more than some people spent in a week. He was young, rich, and used to solving problems before they turned into losses. So when the reports showed food disappearing from his own place, and when every quiet trail seemed to lead back to one waitress with a heavy canvas bag, he did what men like Daniel always did. He started looking for guilt. He had no idea that following her home would tear open a secret bigger than theft and bigger than shame. By the end of it, he would learn that the person he was hunting had been holding a whole family together with tired hands and almost no money at all. The first warning came from Irene Bell, his evening floor manager. Irene was not dramatic, which was one reason Daniel trusted her. If she came to him with concern, she had already checked it twice.
She stood in his office that morning with the smell of roasted garlic and coffee drifting in from the service hallway, a clipboard tight against her chest. "I don't want to accuse the wrong person," she said, "but the closing numbers keep slipping on Nadia's shifts." Daniel looked up from supplier invoices. "Cash?" Irene shook her head. "No, bread count, packaged desserts, staff meals, a few sealed soup containers. Small things, but steady." Daniel leaned back in his chair and tapped a finger against the desk. Small losses irritated him more than large ones. Big problems announced themselves. Small ones hid in routine, and rot always began in routine. He knew Nadia by sight, though only barely. Dark hair always pinned back, plain black shoes polished past their natural life. A soft good evening to guests, and almost no wasted words with staff. She was the kind of employee diners called sweet without ever learning her name. In 2 years at the restaurant, she had never been late enough to trigger a warning. Never argued, never flirted for bigger tips, never joined the after-shift chatter by the alley dumpsters where the others smoked, laughed, and complained about managers. She worked, cleared, reset, disappeared. Daniel had built a business on reading people quickly, and quiet employees made him uneasy. Silence could mean discipline, or it could mean they had gotten very good at hiding. By noon, he was asking questions he pretended were routine. How long had the shortages been happening? About 3 weeks. Did anyone else close that station? Sometimes, but not when the losses lined up cleanly. Had anyone searched bags? No, Irene said, because she wanted facts before humiliation. That answer pleased him more than he showed. Daniel hated mess, especially public mess. "Watch her," he said at last. "Not openly. Just note times, what she carries, who she speaks to, where she goes after close." Irene hesitated. "Daniel, Nadia doesn't seem like that." He gave a thin smile that carried no warmth. "The numbers don't care what she seems like." The reports started arriving 2 days later. Short messages first. Nadia left through the back entrance at nearly the same time every night. She always carried a canvas tote, dull gray, with one strap repaired by hand. Some nights it hung flat. Most nights it looked heavy enough to pull her shoulder down. She never opened it in the locker room. Never let anyone reach into it. One line from Irene stayed in Daniel's mind longer than it should have. "She walks out tired, but not aimless. Like someone going towards something important." He read that line twice, then a third time. The next evening, he watched from the mezzanine while service rolled on below. Nadia moved between tables with that same contained calm. She balanced 3 bowls of pasta on one arm, refilled water glasses, and bent to speak gently to an older customer who seemed embarrassed by his shaking hands. Nothing about her looked careless. Nothing about her suggested appetite or greed. And still, when the last tables were settling checks, Daniel stepped through the service corridor and stood near the stainless steel shelving by the kitchen pass. The air there was hotter, louder. Plates clattered. The dish machine breathed steam. Someone had spilled lemon soda near the ice bin and the floor stuck faintly under his shoes. He saw Nadia when she thought nobody important was looking.
She waited until the pastry station was broken down. Then she glanced once toward the prep sink, once toward the back door, and lifted her canvas bag from beneath a lower shelf. The movement was quick, practiced. Daniel could not see inside, only the weight of it settling against her hip. A cook set a tray of untouched rolls beside the waste tub, and for half a second Nadia's hand hovered near them before she pulled it back. Then she tucked her chin, tightened her grip on the strap, and disappeared into the staff hallway. That should have been enough. He had policies for this: cameras, security, written statements, quiet termination. But Daniel did not call security. Instead, he stood in the smell of yeast, dish soap, and burned butter, staring at the back door she had just gone through. Something in that one restrained gesture, her hands stopping above those unsold bread rolls, as if even taking what was headed for the trash carried a cost, lodged under his skin. By the time he went back to his office, he had already made a decision he would not have explained to anyone on his board. If this story pulls you in, like and subscribe, because the next night Daniel would park across the street, wait for Nadia to leave, and follow her himself. The next night, Daniel left the restaurant before the last table had paid and sat alone in his car across from the service entrance, with the engine off and the leather cooling under him. He had changed out of his jacket so he would not look like himself if anyone glanced in. Still, nothing about him belonged in that alley. The place smelled of fryer oil, wet cardboard, and the sweet, stale trace of spilled wine. From inside came the muffled thump of trays being stacked and the high metallic rattle of the dish station winding down. He checked the time twice, then told himself to stop doing that. This was absurd, really. He owned 5 restaurants. He had accountants, managers, cameras, policies. He did not follow waitresses into the night. And yet there he was, hands loose on the wheel, watching the steel door as if it might answer a question he no longer trusted paper to answer. When Nadia finally stepped out, she looked smaller in the dark than she did under dining room lights. Her hair was still pinned up. Her shoulders were bent with plain old fatigue. The canvas bag hung from one hand, and tonight it pulled hard enough that she shifted it halfway down the block. Daniel waited until she passed the corner before starting his car. He kept 2 lengths back, then 3 when she crossed toward a bus stop lit by one buzzing fluorescent tube. A couple argued softly near a vending machine. Somebody down the street laughed too loudly. Nadia didn't turn around once. She stood with the patience of someone used to waiting because she had no choice. When the bus came, she climbed aboard through the rear door, and Daniel followed in his car, watching its square yellow shape move through districts he usually drove past without seeing. The city changed in layers. First, the polished blocks with their glass fronts and valet stands, then the tired commercial strip with discount stores, payday signs, and shuttered windows sprayed over with peeling paint. Farther still, where streetlights thinned and the sidewalks buckled at the edges. Daniel drove more slowly there. His own headlights caught chain-link fences, leaning porches, laundry lines drawn between fire escapes, a kid on a bicycle too late for his age to be out alone. Nadia got off near a row of old brick buildings that looked one hard winter away from folding in on themselves. The bus sighed shut behind her and pulled away. She adjusted the strap on that same bag and headed toward a narrow entrance beside a broken intercom panel. Daniel parked half a block down, cut the lights, and sat still for a moment with his pulse beating harder than it had any right to. It felt like walking into a story that had been going on without him for years. He followed on foot, the night air carrying damp concrete, cigarette smoke, and somebody's overboiled cabbage through an open window upstairs. The stairwell light inside the building flickered weakly. He heard Nadia's steps on the worn metal treads, quick and familiar. He heard something else. Smaller feet, fast feet, coming from inside one of the apartments before she had even put the key in. Daniel moved to the side of the landing, where the paint had bubbled around the window frame, and from there he could see through a thin gap in a curtain that did not quite close. The door opened, and the whole picture of her changed in a single breath. 3 children rushed her at once. 3. A boy, maybe 12, all elbows and worried eyes. A girl, a little younger, clutching a workbook against her chest. And the smallest, a round-cheeked boy in socks that did not match, already reaching for the bag with both hands. Easy, Nadia said, and her voice was different there, softer and fuller, with no restaurant polish in it at all. Let me get inside first. She nudged the door shut with her heel, set the bag on a scarred kitchen table, and kissed the top of the little one's head without even thinking about it. The apartment behind them was cramped and worn thin by use. One lamp with a yellow shade, a space heater clicking in the corner, a sink full of rinsed containers, a calendar hanging crooked by the fridge, every square filled with small, careful writing. Daniel stayed where he was, one hand flat against the cold wall. He watched Nadia unpack the canvas bag. 2 foil meal containers, a wrapped bundle of rolls, a paper sack with bruised apples, a plastic cup of rice from staff dinner, unsold bread gathered like treasure. The children did not attack it. They waited. That told him almost as much as the food itself. Nadia lined everything up, counting under her breath, dividing portions before anyone touched a thing. "Owen, wash your hands again," she said. "Lila, did Benji finish reading?" The girl nodded. "Half," she said. "He got sleepy." "I wasn't sleepy," the little one protested. "I was hungry." The oldest boy looked at Nadia's face and asked the question that made Daniel's stomach turn. "Did you eat tonight?" Owen said. "Or are you saying yes again so we won't split yours?" From the landing, Daniel watched Nadia answer that question with a smile so practiced it almost hurt to see. "I ate," she said, already reaching for plates that did not match. Owen did not argue, but his eyes stayed on her face another second too long. He was old enough to read what adults tried to soften. Nadia opened one foil container and let the steam rise into the cramped kitchen. The smell of rice, broth, and overcooked chicken filled the room. Benji bounced on his heels. Lila pulled forks from a chipped mug by the sink and laid them out carefully, one beside each plate, as if neatness itself could make the meal larger. Then Nadia did something Daniel had not expected. She set aside the biggest portion before serving anyone else, slid it into a plastic container, wrote "Friday lunch" on a strip of tape, and pressed it into the freezer compartment above the fridge. Planning that far ahead with so little in front of her, that landed in him harder than the sight of the food. He should have gone. He knew that. He had already seen enough to turn suspicion into something far more uncomfortable. But he stayed, listening through the cheap door and the thin walls that let every life in the building bleed into every other one. A television laughed somewhere down the hall. Pipes knocked. Someone upstairs dragged a chair across the floor. Inside Nadia's apartment, she moved through the small space with the speed of a person who had repeated the same routine 1,000 nights in a row. "Homework after you eat," she told Lila, spelling words first. To Owen, she said, "Did you call Mrs. Kessler about the shift?" Owen nodded. "She said maybe Saturday." Nadia paused at that. Daniel saw it even from where he stood, a tiny stillness in her shoulders. Then she kept moving. "All right," she said. "We'll figure it out." We'll figure it out. Not I will. We. The words belonged to somebody carrying children through a life too narrow for all of them. When they sat down, Nadia did not take a plate. She stood by the counter with one hand resting on the back of Benji's chair and watched them eat first. The little boy tore into the roll with both hands, scattering crumbs across the table. Lila dunked hers into the broth to soften it. Owen slowed himself on purpose, trying to make his portion last. Daniel's gaze moved around the room because he could not bear to keep looking only at their mouths. A stack of school papers clipped together with a rubber band. 2 library books with a return slip tucked between the pages. A winter coat hanging by the door, though the weather was warm, probably because there was no closet. On the refrigerator, held up by a cracked magnet shaped like a lemon, were 3 envelopes: rent, electric, school. Nadia pulled them down after the children started eating and counted cash into each one with quick, dry fingers. Bills flattened, then smoothed again.
A few coins rolled across the table, and Benji reached to stop one before it fell. "I got it," he said proudly. She kissed the top of his head without looking up. Daniel felt something inside him shift, slowly at first, then all at once. This was the theft he had come to catch. A woman stretching tips, leftovers, and sheer will across 4 lives. Then Owen pushed his bowl back, stood, and crossed to a narrow cabinet near the stove. "You forgot the notice," he said. His voice was quiet, careful, like someone trying not to upset the room. Nadia took the paper from him so fast Daniel almost missed it, but not before he saw the red print across the top. "Final warning, past due." She folded it in half, then in half again, and slid it beneath the electric envelope as if hiding the words could delay what they meant. Lila looked down at her hands. Benji kept chewing because small children still trust a room if the grown person in it keeps her face steady. Owen did not sit right away. "Landlord came again," he said. Nadia lowered her voice. "We'll talk later." He stayed where he was. He said if the balance isn't caught up by next week, he's changing the lock. For a second, nobody moved. Even from the landing, Daniel could feel the air in that kitchen tighten. Nadia drew in a breath, then another, and made herself sound calm. "That's adult talk," she said. "You 3 finish eating." Owen looked like he wanted to fight her on it, but he swallowed the words and sat. She turned toward the sink then, maybe because she needed the children not to see her face. Her hand went to the counter beside the faucet and rested there, flat, still, white at the knuckles. Daniel had negotiated leases worth millions without his pulse moving at all. Yet standing outside that apartment, looking at a shut-off notice, 3 envelopes, and a girl barely old enough to be raising orphan siblings, he felt less certain than he ever had in his own office. He stepped back from the door at last, careful not to make the floor creak, and in the dim hall, his shoulder brushed the metal row of mailboxes. One of them hung open, bent at the hinge, with a sheaf of letters stuffed inside. As he turned to go, a single envelope slipped free and fell at his feet. He looked down, meaning only to tuck it back where it belonged. Then he saw the return address, Rourke Urban Holdings. Daniel froze with the envelope in his hand, his thumb resting against the printed return address as if the paper itself had gone hot. Rourke Urban Holdings. His family's name looked wrong in that hallway, too clean and expensive against dented mailboxes and flaking green paint. He slid the letter back where he had found it, suddenly aware of every sound he made. A toilet flushed somewhere above him. A baby started crying behind another door. Inside Nadia's apartment, he could still hear plates lightly touching the table and Benji asking for more broth. Daniel stepped backward down the stairs, careful on the worn edges, and did not breathe normally again until he reached the street. The drive home felt longer than the trip there. Red lights stretched, engines idled beside him. At one intersection, a delivery bike knocked over a stack of empty crates, and the crash made him jump. That irritated him almost as much as the thoughts in his head. He told himself there had to be an explanation. Rourke Urban Holdings had touched hundreds of addresses over the years. Old leases, redevelopment notices, delayed filings. The envelope could mean anything, but the name on it had struck him with the force of recognition because he knew how his father's companies worked. Malcolm Rourke built restaurants later, but before that he had built his money on properties, buyouts, renovations, corners of neighborhoods reshaped by paperwork and timing. Daniel had grown up hearing phrases like asset recovery and exposure risk over steak dinners. He had never liked those conversations, yet he had inherited their language anyway. He reached his apartment a little after midnight and went straight to the study instead of bed. The room smelled faintly of cedar shelves and the dark roast coffee his housekeeper had left in the warmer hours earlier. He did not touch it. He opened his laptop, signed into the parent company archive, and started with the simplest search he could think of. Vale. There were too many results at first. Payroll forms, vendor lists. A server named Michael Vale from a sister restaurant years ago. He narrowed the field. Property, legal, holdings. Then one old record surfaced, half buried in an archive no one had cleaned up, because no one expected a son to go digging through the parts of the empire his father preferred to describe as earlier chapters. The file was attached to a property Daniel had never visited, an old mixed-use building on the edge of what later became one of the city's busiest restaurant corridors. Before the redevelopment, the ground floor had housed a small bakery, Vale Family Baking. He sat back when he read that. A real physical place appeared in his mind at once, though he had never seen it. Warm bread in the morning, fogged front windows in winter, people coming in for coffee and leaving with paper bags tucked under one arm. The file itself was cold. Structural concerns, delayed repairs, lease dispute, insurance correspondence. It was the kind of language corporations use when they want harm to sound administrative. Daniel clicked deeper and found scanned documents from over a decade earlier. One mention of an electrical issue during renovation work, one complaint from tenants, one notice stamped "Received." Then a small local news clipping, grainy and tilted from bad scanning, reported a late-night fire in the building's bakery unit and tragic loss to a family-run business. He stared at the screen until his eyes burned. Nadia's last name, the bakery, the envelope. The children in that kitchen with the envelopes labeled rent, electric, school. It was beginning to line up in a way he did not want it to. He opened another attached folder and found the legal case. Vale versus Rourke Urban Holdings. Closed. No settlement paid. Claim unresolved due to insufficient proof of negligence. Beneath that, another memo. Internal. Privileged. He clicked it. The tone changed immediately. Someone from outside counsel had written to Malcolm and two senior executives about potential reputational sensitivity if claimant allegations are amplified. Another line referred to maintaining distance between the family name and site-level contractor disputes. Daniel read it twice because his mind resisted the shape of it. There had been a claim. His father knew about it. People had discussed how close the name should come to the damage. A woman he now saw carrying staff meals home to 3 children had once belonged to the family behind that file. He kept digging. At 2 a.m, he called up an old employee record system for the restaurant group and searched Nadia's personnel file. Emergency contact. Self. Secondary contact field. Blank. Dependents listed nowhere, because waitresses did not have forms designed for the lives they carried in secret. Date of birth put her younger than he had guessed when the fire happened. A note from hiring 2 years ago mentioned that she preferred late shifts because daytime family responsibilities make mornings difficult. Daniel shut his eyes for a second after reading that. The note had been there all along, sitting in a database while he shook his head over bread counts. By 3, his apartment had gone fully silent. No traffic hum from below, no elevator doors, just the low sound of the air system and the tiny ticking of the clock on the wall. Daniel printed the legal summary, the property file, the old article, and laid them across his desk in a neat row. He could feel his first certainty dying there. The theft he had chased to the city's edge no longer looked like theft. It looked like hunger with rules broken around it. Worse than that, it looked tied to something older, something his father's money had survived and another family had not. Then he found one more scanned page tucked behind the legal closure memo. It was not from a lawyer. It was from Claims Review, and a sentence near the bottom made his chest tighten. Recommended settlement approved pending executive sign-off. Below it, in handwriting he recognized immediately, were 2 words from Malcolm Rourke. Decline payment. Daniel did not sleep after that. He stayed in the study while the city outside his windows went from black glass to that thin gray hour when buildings look unfinished. The printed pages remained spread across his desk, and his father's handwriting sat in the middle of them like a stain that would not dry. Decline payment. 2 words. No anger in them, no hesitation, no mess, just decision.
Daniel had spent years admiring that clean decisiveness in Malcolm Rourke. Investors admired it. Vendors feared it. Staff learned to step faster around it. Now, with Nadia's apartment still vivid in his mind, the chipped plates, the envelopes on the fridge, Owen watching whether she lied about eating, he could not hide from what those two words meant in real life. Somewhere in the chain between a property file and a burnt bakery, a family had fallen through. And last night, he had stood outside their door, hunting missing food like it was the whole story. By 6:30, he was back at the restaurant, earlier than the bakers. The front dining room was dim, chairs still upside down on tables, the air cool and carrying the faint smell of bleach and old coffee grounds. In daylight, before the music and the guests and the polished performance of service, the place looked almost honest. Daniel walked through the kitchen with the papers in a flat envelope under his arm. He stopped near the office and called up Nadia's employee file again, this time slowly, for the shape of her life. Emergency contact, self. Address confirmed. Shift preference, late evenings. Benefits package declined. There was a short note from onboarding that he had skimmed over 2 years ago and forgotten within minutes. Applicant requests consistent close shifts due to dependent care obligations. Dependent care. Those 2 words had sat inside his own system while he approved staffing reports and chased bread counts. Irene arrived 10 minutes later, carrying her travel mug and a ring of keys. She paused when she saw him already there. "You're early," she said. Daniel looked up from the screen. "How long has Nadia been picking up extra closes?" Irene set the mug down slowly. "A while. Since winter, maybe earlier." She studied his face. "Why?" He did not answer that. Instead, he asked, "Did she ever tell anyone what was going on at home?" Irene gave a tired little breath through her nose. "Not directly. She's not that kind of person." Then, after a moment, she added, "I know she asks for leftover kids' menu fruit sometimes. And once she asked if we were really throwing out 6 rolls from a private booking. I said yes." She looked relieved, not sneaky. Daniel turned his chair a few inches away so Irene would not see the legal file still open on the monitor. "Why didn't you tell me any of that?" She met his eyes with more steadiness than most managers used on him. "Because you asked whether she was stealing. You didn't ask whether she was desperate." That answer stayed with him long after Irene left to start the floor check. A little later, he called Human Resources and asked for archived hiring records from the year Nadia came on. He gave no reason beyond executive review, and people moved quickly when he used that tone. By mid-morning, an older digital packet had been forwarded over. Tax forms, ID copy, training acknowledgments. One scanned application in Nadia's handwriting, neat and pressed hard enough into the page to suggest she had filled it out on an uneven surface. In the section marked household members, she had listed 3 names under 18. Owen Vale, Lila Vale, Benjamin Vale. Relationship, siblings. Under parental status, she had written 1 word, deceased. Daniel stared at that box for a long time. The children had not drifted into her care for a weekend or a temporary rough patch. She had put them on a job application because she had been carrying them from the beginning. He kept going. There was a rejected request from last year for schedule adjustment on school registration week. A payroll advance inquiry she never completed. A note from an outside legal aid partner connected to the benefits portal. Client consultation requested, appointment missed, file inactive. Daniel called the number attached to that partner line and reached an administrator who could say almost nothing, except that the consultation had concerned guardianship paperwork and identity records for minors. "No follow-through?" Daniel asked. "No payment confirmation," the woman said gently. "Without that, we couldn't open the case." Guardianship, so even the children under Nadia's roof were not fully safe on paper. He sat back, rubbing at the bridge of his nose while the lunch prep gathered pace beyond the office door. Knives tapping boards, the low whir of the walk-in fan, someone laughing too loudly near dry storage. Normal sounds, a normal day. And beneath it, a buried claim his father had helped shut down, a waitress holding together 3 young lives, and a company owner who now understood that his first instinct had been to punish the wrong person for surviving badly. Near noon, Irene knocked once on the office frame and stepped in. "She's here," she said quietly. Daniel looked past her through the narrow glass panel in the door. Nadia was in the corridor, tying her apron, her face calm, her canvas bag tucked into the locker at her feet. And he realized that in a few seconds, he was going to call her into his office and ask about theft, while knowing far more than she could possibly imagine. For a moment, Daniel almost told Irene to send Nadia back to the floor and forget the meeting. Almost. But the lunch rush would begin in less than an hour, and if he let her walk past his office now, he would spend the entire service hearing dishes, voices, chair legs, and the quiet scrape of his own conscience together. So he straightened the papers into one stack, slid the property file into a drawer, and said, "Ask her to come in for a minute." Irene studied him, as if she could tell the conversation in his head had changed shape overnight. Then she nodded and stepped away. Nadia entered with her order pad in one hand and that same composed face she wore on the floor. Up close, in the plain office light, Daniel noticed things he had never bothered to notice before. A tiny burn mark near the cuff of her black sleeve, maybe from a tray warmer. Faint shadows under her eyes. Hands that looked younger than the rest of her, except for the knuckles, which were roughened and dry. She closed the door gently behind her and stood instead of sitting. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Daniel gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Please." She sat, but only barely, back straight, shoulders tight, as if she expected to need her feet under her quickly. The office smelled of printer ink, coffee gone cool, and the sharp lemon cleaner the morning porter used on the counters. Daniel had had difficult meetings in that room before. Terminations, vendor disputes, legal calls. He had always known where the ground was under him. This time, he did not. He folded his hands once, unfolded them, then chose the simplest possible truth. "There have been inventory losses on the late shift," he said. "Food items, staff meals, bread. Things have been leaving the building without authorization." Nadia did not interrupt. He went on. "Your name keeps coming up with those nights." Silence filled the space between them, but it was not the kind he was used to. It felt crowded with consequences. Nadia lowered her eyes for 1 second, then lifted them again. No panic, no performance, just a tired kind of readiness. "I know," she said. Daniel blinked. "You know?" She nodded once. "I know what this is about." Her voice stayed level, and that made it harder to hear. "I took food out, some staff meal containers, bread that was headed for the waste bin, fruit if it was being thrown out, once or twice soup if the kitchen had extra. I know it wasn't allowed." She rested both hands in her lap and pressed them together to keep them still. "If you need me to sign something, I will. If you need me gone, I understand." Daniel had expected denial, maybe tears, maybe a half-story built to soften the edges. He had not expected this dignity, this clean acceptance. "Why didn't you ask?" he said before he could stop himself. A flicker moved across her face then, something older than anger. "Ask who?" she said quietly. "For what?" He had no answer ready, and she saw that at once, so she gave him hers. "My brothers and sisters need to eat," she said. "That's the shortest version." She glanced toward the frosted glass in the office door, where blurred shapes moved in the corridor. "If you want the longer one, I can give it to you, but it won't make the policy different." Daniel said nothing. Nadia took that silence as permission to continue. "I work closes because I need the tips. I take doubles because one shift doesn't cover rent anymore. I bring home what would be thrown out because buying fresh food every day for 4 people isn't possible right now." Her jaw tightened for the first time. "I never took cash. I never touched guest property. I never sold anything. I took food and I took it home." The room seemed to contract around those words. Daniel heard again the rustle of envelopes on her kitchen table, the child asking for more broth. Owen watching her as if he were both son and witness. But he could not say any of that, not yet. He could not tell her that he had stood outside her apartment like a stranger and listened to her divide dinner with surgeon's care. So he kept his face steady and asked the question that belonged to the role she still thought he was playing. "Who is at home with them when you're here?" "My brother's old enough to stay with the other two for a few hours," she said. "He shouldn't have to be, but he is." That answer came out fast, like something repeated before to school offices, landlords, maybe neighbors. Then her voice lowered. "Mr. Rourke, I'm not going to pretend I didn't break your rules. I did. But I need you to hear one thing clearly. I did not do it because I thought your restaurant wouldn't miss it. I did it because by the time I leave here at night, the stores near our place are closed and the kids are waiting." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. On his desk, the corner of her personnel file showed beneath another sheet of paper. He could see the typed words from where he sat. Dependent care obligations. All this time, the truth had been sitting in the same building as the accusation. Nadia misread his silence in the most painful way possible. "If you can," she said, and now her voice softened for the first time. "Please don't end it today. Let me finish the week. Owen needs school shoes, and my little brother's field trip money is due on Friday. After that, do whatever you need to do." Daniel felt something heavy settle in his chest. Even here, even cornered, she was negotiating for children before herself. He leaned back slowly, eyes still on her face, and asked the question that made her expression change at last. "How long," he said, "have you been raising them alone?" Nadia did not answer right away. For the first time since she had walked into his office, the stillness in her face cracked. Her eyes searched his for a second, with surprise. That was not the question she had expected from a man preparing to discipline her. Beyond the office door, the restaurant was waking up around them. A prep cook laughed in the hallway. Someone rolled a cart over tile, the wheels knocking at each seam. The ordinary sound of the building carried on as if nothing in this room had shifted. But it had. "Since Owen was 10, she said at last. Lila was 8. Benji was barely 3. Her voice was quiet, almost matter-of-fact now, the way people speak when the truth is too old to dramatize. Daniel did the math without meaning to. Years. Not months, not some recent emergency she had been scrambling through. Years of this. Years of late shifts, bus rides, divided meals, rent notices, and children who knew how to watch a face before they asked for seconds. Nadia looked down at her hands once, then kept going. "My parents died within the same year. After that, there wasn't anybody who stayed." Daniel let the silence hold. He knew more than she realized, but he needed to hear it from her in her own words, not from an archive and a dead man's initials. "What happened?" he asked. She drew a breath that sounded shallow in the small room. "There was a fire at my parents' bakery," she said. "It started late, after closing. My father was still inside." She stopped there for a beat, and Daniel could hear the hum of the office light over them. "My mother tried to keep things going after that. She got hurt too, and then the bills started. The business never reopened. By the time the paperwork ended, there wasn't much left to lose." She did not cry. That struck him more than tears would have. She had gone too far past the part of grief that spills outward. People said there would be help. There were calls, meetings, letters. Then there weren't. Daniel felt the back of his neck go cold, though the office was warm. He knew what sat in his drawer. He knew what his father had written. He knew the name on the old property file. Still, he asked, because the story was tightening around them, and there was no way through now except straight ahead. Was there a claim? Nadia gave him a long look then, one that held more intelligence than he had ever credited her with. "You already know there was," she said. It was recognition. Daniel did not deny it, so she continued. "My mother was told the building had problems before the fire. She was told there'd be an investigation. Somebody said the owners would have to answer for it. Her mouth tightened. Then the company stopped taking calls. The lawyer she found stopped returning hers. After my mother died, I was too busy trying to keep the three of them together to chase a buried claim I didn't understand. That phrase hit him because it matched the shape of what he had read the night before. Not her exact words, but the reality under them. A file closed. A settlement declined. A family left to shrink itself around the damage. Daniel could feel his pulse in his palms. He kept them flat on the desk so she would not see. "Do your brother and sisters live with you legally?" he asked, and this time the question brought something sharper to her face. "No," she said.
I mean, yes, they live with me. Everybody who matters knows that. School knows, the landlord knows, even if he pretends not to. But the paperwork isn't clean. She looked toward the door again, hearing the restaurant gather speed outside. "I started the guardianship process. I got partway through it. Then there were fees and hearing dates during work hours and records I couldn't get without paying for copies." She gave a small, humorless breath. "Turns out the system likes children better when the adult caring for them has time and money." Daniel leaned back slowly. Guardianship, legal aid, missed appointments. Everything in the file had a living echo in her voice. Nadia misread his expression again, though this time there was less resignation in it and more caution. "If this changes what you do with my job," she said, "then say it plainly. I can handle plain." She lifted her chin a little. "But please don't ask me to be ashamed of feeding them. I'm tired and I'm behind, and I know exactly how bad this looks from where you sit. But I won't be ashamed of that part." Something in Daniel gave way at those words, because from where he sat, it no longer looked like what he had thought at all. It looked like a young woman holding together three orphan siblings, while a company bearing his own family name had once stepped over the wreckage that made them hers. He had called her in to discuss policy. He was now sitting across from evidence of his father's cruelty, still breathing. He reached for the edge of the desk, steadying himself before he spoke again. "Nadia," he said more carefully than before, "there's something I need to ask, and I need you to answer as honestly as you can. Did your parents' bakery have a name?" She stared at him for one long second. Then she said very softly, "Vale Family Baking." And Daniel opened the drawer beside him where the file still waited. Nadia's eyes dropped to the drawer before Daniel even opened it, and that was enough to change the air in the room. He pulled the file out slowly, not with the confidence of a man presenting evidence, but with the care of someone handling something already sharp. The folder made a dry paper sound against the desk. Outside, the lunch team was gathering speed. Glassware clinked. The host stand phone rang twice, stopped, then rang again. Ordinary restaurant sounds, busy and polished, while inside that office, the past had started breathing again. Daniel set the top page in front of her. She looked at the name on the copied legal summary, then at him, and the color in her face changed. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "In our archives," he said. "Our," she repeated softly, and then she gave one small nod as if something unpleasant had just confirmed itself. She did not touch the paper at first. Daniel could see her deciding whether she wanted to know more, or whether surviving had required her, for years now, not to know too much. Finally, she reached out. Her fingers rested on the edge of the page, then flattened it. "Vale versus Rourke Urban Holdings. Closed." She read the line once, then again. "So it was real," she said, almost to herself. "My mother wasn't imagining it." Daniel kept his voice low. "You didn't know?" "I knew there had been meetings, calls, a lawyer for a little while." She looked up at him with that same contained steadiness he had seen on the floor. "I was young, but not that young. I remember my mother sitting at a kitchen table with receipts and letters and a legal pad she couldn't fill because every time she started writing, she'd cry first." Her mouth tightened. Then people started using phrases instead of answers. Under review, pending, insufficient documentation. She stopped explaining after a while. Nadia glanced back down at the page. "I thought maybe the whole thing had died because she didn't know how to fight it properly." Daniel swallowed.
It didn't die on its own. That made her lift her eyes again. This time there was no surprise in them, only caution. What do you mean? He hesitated for the briefest second, and she saw that too. Nadia was not a woman who missed what lived between words. So Daniel took out the claims review sheet and laid it beside the legal summary. He turned it toward her, toward the note at the bottom in Malcolm's hand. He did not soften the moment. He did not cover the name with his thumb. Nadia read it in silence. Recommended settlement approved pending executive sign-off. Then the handwritten instruction, decline payment. She did not gasp. She did not break down. She went very still. Daniel had spent enough time around powerful people to know that silence can mean calculation, rage, disbelief, or pain too old to waste itself on noise. What settled over Nadia was the last of those. She stared at the page until the office sounds outside seemed to fade. When she finally spoke, her voice was thinner than before, but it never shook. Your father wrote that. Yes. And you knew that before you called me in here. Yes. She leaned back a little, her hands leaving the papers as if they had become warmer than she could hold. So when you asked me about taking bread and staff meals, she let the sentence hang there. Daniel felt it finish itself without her help. He had called her in over missing food while holding the record of a much larger theft in his own desk. A family business, a chance at compensation, a margin of survival. Gone under a neat instruction from a man whose name was still on the building. I found it last night, he said quietly, after I followed you home. That landed harder than the rest. Her eyes sharpened at once. You what? Daniel did not look away. I followed you after your shift. I thought I was going to catch you taking food to sell or hiding more than the cameras showed. I saw where you live. I saw Owen, Lila, and Benji. I saw the envelopes on the fridge. His voice had gone rough in a way he was not used to hearing from himself. I know how wrong that was. I know I had no right. For the first time since entering the office, Nadia stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor. You came to my home? She asked, and now the restraint in her had an edge. Not a raised voice, something cleaner. You stood outside my door and watched my family eat? Daniel stood too, though more slowly. Yes. She turned away from the desk for a second and pressed her fingertips to her forehead. When she faced him again, her expression was not wild or dramatic. It was wounded in a much more dangerous way than that. Do you understand what that feels like? She asked. To work in one of your restaurants all night, then come home and find out later the owner was outside your apartment deciding what kind of poor person you were? He had no defense that would not insult both of them, so he gave her none. I do now, he said. Or I'm beginning to. Nadia laughed once, but there was no humor in it. No, Mr. Rourke. You're beginning to understand what I can't hide anymore. That's different. She glanced down at the papers again, at his father's handwriting, at the family name printed across the case file. My mother used to say companies apologize in paragraphs because they want you to miss the sentence that matters. Her eyes came back to him. Is there more? Daniel felt that question settle between them with frightening weight. Because there was more. In the archive, he had seen not only the declined settlement, but notes about prior electrical complaints, renovation delays, and internal concern over exposure. Enough to suggest this had never been one bad accident followed by chaos. Enough to suggest people had known risk was gathering and kept moving anyway. He had not shown her those pages yet. Not because he wanted to protect his father. Because once she saw them, nothing between them would ever be capable of pretending again. He opened the folder wider, and Nadia saw more documents inside than the two he had placed on the desk. Then she asked the question that made his hand stop on the next page. How much did your family know before my father died? Daniel kept his hand on the file and answered her with the honesty he had left. Enough to know this was not a surprise after the fact, he said. Nadia did not sit down again. She stood beside the chair with both arms close to her body, as if she needed to keep herself contained to stay upright. The office felt smaller now. the hum of the refrigeration line through the wall, a burst of laughter from the prep station, the soft hiss of the espresso machine starting up at the bar. All of it made the room feel stranger, because life outside was moving on schedule, while something old and cruel was being named in here. Daniel took out 2 more pages and placed them on the desk between them. One was a maintenance complaint logged before the fire. The other was an internal memo mentioning electrical concerns at tenant unit level during renovation work. Nadia looked at the pages, but this time she did not reach for them. "My father told my mother the lights had been flickering in the back room," she said, almost absently, as if she were remembering aloud to herself. "I remember that. I remember him saying he'd complained again because the smell near the mixer outlet got worse when the ovens were on." Her eyes shifted to Daniel. "Are you telling me they knew there was a problem?" Daniel gave the smallest nod. Her face changed in a way that was harder to witness than tears would have been. Not louder, not dramatic, just emptied out for a second, as if something she had spent years holding in place had quietly broken its last support. "My mother spent so long wondering whether they could have done something different," she said. "Whether he should have closed earlier, whether she should have pushed harder, whether the wiring had been old anyway, that kind of thing. People say things after a loss because they want the story to make sense." She swallowed once. "You're showing me that it made sense already, to them." Daniel could not defend his father. He could not even defend the version of himself from a week ago, the man who would have called this a legal issue and moved on. "There are notes about risk," he said quietly, "and about exposure. I haven't read every document yet, but I've read enough." He stopped there, because beyond that point, the words started sounding like corporate language again, and he could hear how obscene that would be in front of her. Nadia stared at the papers for another moment, then finally sat back down. This time, she did not ask permission. She lowered herself slowly, as if her knees had lost confidence. "Did my mother sign anything?" she asked. "Some paper saying she accepted whatever they offered? I was too young to understand half of what came in the mail." Daniel flipped through the folder, scanning the tabs he had marked before dawn. "Not that I've found. There's a closure summary, insurer correspondence, internal notes, and a recommendation that never became payment. If there was a final release, it isn't in this set." A faint line formed between Nadia's brows. "Then how did it just disappear?" "That," Daniel said, "is what I'm trying to understand." She let out a slow breath and looked toward the door. Through the frosted glass, 2 staff members passed with trays balanced on one shoulder. She seemed to be listening to the shape of her own life from the wrong side of a wall. "When my mother was still well enough to argue," she said after a while, "she kept saying there was a man from the company who wasn't a lawyer but talked like one. He came twice, once to the hospital, once to where we were staying after the bakery closed. He kept telling her the investigation was active, and the best thing was to avoid public accusations until the facts were clear." Nadia gave a brittle little laugh with no humor in it. "Facts. I hated that word for a long time." Daniel's attention sharpened. "Do you know his name?" She closed her eyes briefly, searching memory. "Pike. Gerald, I think. Or Gerard, something like that." Daniel felt a pulse of recognition. Gerald Pike was not a ghost from some distant file. He still appeared on occasional advisory lists tied to old holdings and risk management reviews. Daniel had seen the name in board packets and never asked who the man had once been to the family. Now the room seemed to tilt again. "I know the name," he said. Nadia's gaze fixed on him immediately. "Of course you do." He heard the hurt inside that sentence and did not argue with it. "He may still be reachable," Daniel said. "If he handled the matter directly, he may know where the rest of the record went." Nadia's mouth set hard. "You say that like records misplaced themselves." Daniel accepted the blow. "No, I don't." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Daniel could hear his own breathing, controlled but heavier than usual. Nadia's fingers rested on the edge of the claims sheet, near his father's handwriting. but she did not touch the ink itself. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Do I get dismissed for taking food while you investigate how your father let my family drown?" It was not sarcasm. It was the practical question of someone whose life did not pause for revelation. That question brought him to the point he had been circling since dawn. "You are not being dismissed," he said. She looked at him without relief. That struck him too. Most people would have grabbed at that line immediately. Nadia had learned the hard way that good news from powerful people often arrived with a hidden condition attached. "Why?" she asked. "Because prosecution would be obscene," he said before he could edit it into something gentler. "Because what you took kept children fed."
Because I know now what stood behind it. And because this, he touched the file once with 2 fingers, is larger than a restaurant policy. Nadia went very still again. "You're serious?" "Yes." She looked down at the pages, then back up. "If you mean any of this, Mr. Rourke, then don't give me kindness in private and silence in public. I've lived through that already." The words were calm, but they carried weight. "If there are records, find them. If there are people who buried this, make them say it. And if you're only doing this because you feel guilty after standing outside my door—" She let the rest trail off. Daniel held her gaze. "Then I'll have to prove otherwise." A knock came at the office door. Irene opened it just enough to lean in, her voice low and careful. "Daniel, sorry. There's a man up front asking for you. He says it's urgent." She glanced at Nadia, then back to him. "He gave his name." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest before Irene even said it. "Gerald Pike." The name seemed to drain the heat from the room. Nadia's expression changed first. Not fear exactly. Recognition with an old layer of disgust under it. Daniel saw her jaw tighten before she said a word. Irene was still at the door, waiting for instructions, her hand on the frame. The lunch crowd would start arriving any minute. Silverware was being rolled out front. Someone in the kitchen called for more parsley. Life kept moving towards service, while the one man Nadia had just named from her mother's worst years was standing somewhere beyond the hostess stand asking to see Daniel. "Don't send him away," Daniel said. Irene looked from him to Nadia, understood enough to stay quiet, and nodded. "Conference room?" she asked. "Yes." When she disappeared, Nadia let out a slow breath through her nose. "He used to wear gray suits," she said, as if the detail had lived in her mind all this time untouched. "Always smelled like mint and expensive aftershave. He never raised his voice. That was the part my mother hated most." Daniel closed the file and slid it together, but he did not put it away. "Will you stay?" he asked. Nadia's eyes moved to his face. "For what?" "To hear what he says." She gave a small, tired shake of her head. "Men like him don't say the truth in front of people like me." Daniel answered before he could soften it. "Then he can learn." They walked together down the back corridor, though there was distance between them still. The restaurant lights were up now, reflecting off polished brass and wine glasses set in perfect lines. A server carrying folded napkins stepped aside for Daniel with a quick, "Morning, boss," then glanced at Nadia and kept going. The contrast made him wince inwardly. In this building, he was certainty. She was labor. In the file tucked under his arm, that order had already begun to rot. They entered the small, glass-walled conference room off the administrative wing. It smelled faintly of old leather chairs and lemon polish. Nadia did not sit right away. She chose the place farthest from the door and folded her arms. A minute later, Gerald Pike entered with Irene behind him. He was older than Daniel expected, but composed in that same sleek way some men carry age, as if time had only turned them more expensive. Silver at the temples, trim suit, pale blue tie. And yes, Nadia had remembered right. A cool mint scent followed him in, clean and deliberate. He smiled at Daniel first, the familiar professional kind that assumes access before permission. "Daniel," he said, extending a hand. I was in the area and thought we should speak before this archive review of yours gets any more theatrical. Then he saw Nadia. The hand lowered. It was only a second, but it was enough. Enough for Daniel to catch it. Enough for Nadia to catch it too. Gerald recovered quickly, but not quickly enough to hide that he knew exactly who she was connected to. "I see we're not keeping this private," he said. Nadia pulled out her chair then and sat with a calm so flat it was almost frightening. "You remember my family," she said. It was not a question. Gerald chose his seat carefully, one chair over from Daniel rather than directly opposite Nadia. "Miss Vale," he said, and hearing that name in his mouth made Daniel's stomach turn. "I remember a difficult property matter from years ago, yes." Nadia gave a short laugh with no mirth in it. "A difficult property matter. That's one way to describe a bakery burning and a family getting buried under paperwork." Gerald kept his eyes on Daniel. "This is exactly why I came. Emotion is already getting ahead of the facts." Daniel laid the file on the table and opened it to the claims recommendation, then to the maintenance complaint. Paper brushed wood with a sound that seemed louder than it should have. "Then let's keep up with the facts," he said. "Why was a recommended settlement declined?" Gerald's face stayed smooth. "I had no authority over executive decisions." "Who advised the executive?" Daniel asked. Gerald folded his hands. "My role was limited: risk assessment, communication strategy, standard containment." Nadia's mouth tightened at that word. Daniel heard it too. Containment. As if grief had been a chemical spill. "Did you tell Nadia's mother not to speak publicly?" Daniel asked. Gerald tipped his head, almost patient. "I advised restraint while contractors and insurers reviewed liability. That was responsible." Nadia leaned forward then, finally, and every word she spoke landed clean. "You came to the hospital and told my mother that if she made noise before the investigation closed, she'd lose any chance at help. Do you remember saying that?" Gerald looked at her now, and for the first time his expression hardened by a fraction. "People hear what fear lets them hear," he said. The silence after that was sharp. Daniel felt anger rise, cold and exact. "Did you pressure witnesses?" he asked. Gerald did not answer immediately. He uncapped the bottle of water at his place, took one small sip, and set it back down. "You were using very loaded language for an internal review, Daniel. Answer the question." "I spoke to tenants. I clarified timelines. I discouraged speculation." He said it as if he were describing the weather. Nadia's hand closed around the edge of the table. Daniel saw the tendons stand out in her wrist. "And the missing documents?" Daniel asked. "Some of the correspondence stops. The file has gaps." Gerald's gaze shifted to the folder, then back to Daniel. "Archives from that period were incomplete before digitization. You know how these things happen." Daniel knew exactly how things happened when powerful men wanted mess to disappear. He also knew Gerald had not come here by accident. "Who told you I was reviewing the Vale case?" he asked. That was the first question that truly unsettled him. Just a flicker, a small pause, a glance toward the glass wall, then back. "I keep an eye on matters that may affect the family," Gerald said. "Which family member?" Nadia asked quietly. Gerald turned to her again, and this time he did not bother pretending not to understand the danger in the room. "The one," he said, "who asked me to make sure Daniel didn't tear open something better left closed." For a second, nobody in that room moved. Gerald had said it almost casually, as if the sentence were ordinary business. "The one who asked me." Not my father, because Malcolm was dead. Not some vague concern from the company. A living member of Daniel's family had known he was digging and had sent this man ahead of the truth like a broom pushed across a dirty floor. Daniel felt the pulse jump once in his throat. Nadia did not look surprised anymore. Hurt had left her face. In its place was that colder thing people grow when disappointment stops being new. Gerald adjusted his cuff, glanced once toward the glass wall, and seemed to realize he had stepped half an inch too far.
What I mean, he said smoothly, is that people who care about the Rourke name prefer not to revive stale matters that help no one. Daniel stayed where he was, hands flat on the table.
Which family member?
Gerald gave a patient little smile. You know how families work, Daniel. Concern travels. Nadia let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. That's not an answer. Gerald turned his gaze on her. No, Miss Vale. It's the only answer you're entitled to right now. That did it. Daniel had spent years around polished cruelty, and in some quiet part of himself, he had accepted it as professionalism when it wore the right tie. Hearing it aimed directly at Nadia in his own building made the disguise impossible. You don't get to decide what she's entitled to, he said. Gerald's eyes returned to him, and the warmth drained out of his expression for good. Be careful, he said softly. You are very close to creating liability where for years there has been none. Daniel almost laughed then, because there it was again. Liability, exposure, containment. All those clean words for human wreckage. He opened the folder to the maintenance complaint and turned it toward Gerald. Were you aware of these notices before the fire? Gerald looked down but did not touch the page. I was aware that properties in transition generate noise. Nadia flinched at that word. Noise. Daniel heard it too. A man died, he said. A woman spent the rest of her life trying to keep her children together. That's what you're calling noise? Gerald leaned back in his chair. I'm calling it tragic. I'm also calling it old, and I am advising you, as someone who protected this family for a long time, to stop confusing guilt with good judgment. Nadia spoke before Daniel could. Protected? She asked. Her voice was low, but each word came down with weight. My mother came home from the hospital after meeting you and sat at a folding table for 2 hours staring at forms she couldn't understand. She thought if she said the wrong thing, help would disappear. You protected a company. You did not protect a family. Gerald actually looked irritated now, which in him was more revealing than anger. Your mother was emotional and unwell, he said. She was difficult to advise. The silence after that sentence seemed to ring. Daniel saw Nadia's fingers tighten around the arm of her chair until the skin went pale. She stood very slowly. Don't, she said. Don't speak about her like you were there for anything except damage control. Gerald rose too, perhaps thinking height would return authority to him. It did not. Nadia was not loud. She did not need to be. You came into hospital rooms and temporary rentals and told frightened people to wait while money arranged itself around them. Then you call that professionalism. I know your type now. Daniel stepped in then, enough to redirect the room. Sit down, Gerald, he said, or leave. But if you stay, answer plainly. Gerald remained standing. Plainly? Fine. Your father made a call. I supported it. The claim was weak in court, expensive in public, and dangerous for ongoing financing. The family interest came first. That is what executives do when they intend to keep hundreds employed instead of drowning with one tenant dispute. One tenant dispute. Nadia's face changed at those words in a way Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. It was not shock. She already knew the moral shape of men like this. It was the confirmation that the worst version of her memory had still been too kind. Daniel closed the file with more force than he intended. The crack of cardboard echoed in the glass room. Get out, he said. Gerald studied him. Think carefully. Get out. Gerald picked up his water bottle, left it unopened, and straightened his jacket. At the door, he paused and looked back once, but only at Daniel. If you keep pulling this thread, you will learn that your father was not alone in the decision. Families build fortunes together. They also keep them together. Ask your Aunt Evelyn if you want the truth about loyalty. Then he left. The door closed with a soft click that felt louder than a slammed one. For a few moments, neither Daniel nor Nadia spoke. Outside, the first lunch guests were arriving. He could hear the host's bright, practiced greeting, The muted roll of suitcase wheels from someone checking into the hotel wing upstairs, the low music beginning in the dining room. Inside the conference room, the mint scent Gerald had brought with him still hung in the air, and Daniel hated it. Nadia sat down again, but only because her legs seemed to need the chair. She looked tired in a new way now, as if old strain had found a fresh place to settle. "Evelyn Rourke," she said after a while.
Who is that?
Daniel stared at the closed door. "My father's sister." Nadia held his gaze. "Did she know about us?" Daniel answered honestly, because anything else would have been cowardice. "I don't know." She nodded once. "Then find out." He did not answer immediately, not because he doubted the need, but because he suddenly saw where the next door led. Not to an archive, not to an outside fixer, to his own blood. To family dinners, inheritance language, the old code of silence dressed up as protection. He gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and looked at Nadia across the table that had stopped being a workplace table an hour ago. "I will," he said. "But before I speak to Evelyn, there's something else you need to see." He opened the file again and pulled out a sheet he had not shown her yet, one marked by the insurer's review team in the margin with a line that made his chest tighten all over again. Then Nadia read the heading and whispered, "Witness statements?" Daniel slid the sheet closer, and Nadia bent over it without touching the paper at first. The conference room had gone quiet again after Gerald left, but the quiet was different now, thinner, charged. Through the glass wall, Daniel could see a busser crossing the corridor with a stack of polished water glasses, each one catching the overhead light. Somewhere out front, a guest laughed, bright and easy. Inside, Nadia read line by line, her lips parting once, then pressing shut. These were brief statements from tenants in the old building. One mentioned sparks behind a rear counter outlet. Another mentioned repeated complaints during renovation. A third described a smell of heated plastic near the bakery's prep area. Then, lower on the page, there was a notation beside two names, revised after follow-up interview. Nadia finally touched the margin with one finger. "Revised," she repeated. "So they changed what they said." "That's what it looks like," Daniel said. She kept reading. The paper trembled slightly in her hand now, though the rest of her was still. "Mrs. Hensley," she whispered. "She worked mornings at the bakery sometimes. Part-time, mostly cash because my father couldn't afford more. She used to bring crossword books." Nadia looked up. "She's alive, or she was, a few years ago." Daniel leaned forward at once. "Do you know where she is?" Nadia shook her head slowly. "No." "After the fire, we lost track of almost everybody. People disappear when places close." Her eyes dropped back to the page. "But if she gave a statement before and changed it later, she matters." Daniel nodded. "She does." For a few seconds, they both looked at the same sheet from opposite sides of the table, and something had shifted again. Not trust, not yet, but the shape of the room had changed. Nadia was no longer just the employee he had accused, and he was no longer only the owner with the power to end her shift. Now they were staring at the remains of the same story, and both of them knew it. Daniel gathered the witness pages, the claims review, the maintenance notice, and aligned them carefully. "I'm going to copy all of this and send it to outside counsel," he said. "Not our company lawyers, someone with no connection to my family." Nadia looked at him sharply. "Why?" That question carried more than curiosity. Why would he do it? Why now? Why for her? Daniel answered without taking time to polish it. "Because the people connected to my family protected the company, not the truth. I'm not handing this back to them." Nadia sat back, studying him. "And me?" she asked. "What happens to me today? I still have 3 kids at home and a double shift on Saturday." He heard the exhaustion underneath it, not self-pity. Scheduling, money, school shoes, field trip forms. The future in her house still came due by the hour, even while the past was being reopened. "You're not working the floor today," Daniel said. Her expression hardened instantly. "You said I wasn't being dismissed." "You're not," he held her gaze. I'm taking you off shift because after this conversation, I'm not sending you out with menus and a smile like nothing happened. She did not soften. I can work. I know you can. That's not the point. He reached for a notepad, wrote down a name and number, then slid it across to her. This is a family law attorney, independent. I've used her once on a labor housing matter and she doesn't answer to the Rourke companies. I want you to call her today about guardianship. Nadia looked at the note but did not pick it up. I can't pay a family law attorney. You won't. Her eyes came back to him at once. Then who will? Daniel let that sit for a second because there was no elegant way to say it. I will. Nadia's mouth opened just slightly, then closed again. The disbelief in her face was immediate and reasonable. Daniel went on before she could refuse on instinct. And before you say no, hear me. I am not offering charity because I feel dramatic in a conference room. I'm telling you there are children whose legal safety has been delayed long enough, and there is no decent version of me that walks away from that now. She stared at him, and for the first time since he had asked her into his office, her composure showed an actual crack. It was small, a shimmer in the eyes, a breath held too long. You don't get to buy your way out of this, she said quietly. No, Daniel said, I don't. The answer seemed to stop her more than defense would have. He kept going. This is not me buying my way out. There is no out. There's only what I do next. He wrote 2 more things on the pad. A grocery account at one of the company's suppliers. A prepaid transport card for school and appointments, something Mara in finance could set up within an hour without questions spreading. These start today if you agree, he said. Food you don't have to carry home in secret. Transportation for the kids, and legal help for the guardianship filing. Nadia looked down at the list. Her throat moved when she swallowed. Why would I agree to any of that from you? She asked. That was the real question. More real than the papers. More dangerous than Gerald Pike. Daniel answered as plainly as he could. You shouldn't trust me quickly. I followed you home. I accused you before I understood anything worth understanding. And my family's name is sitting all over the worst years of your life. He paused, then added, but if I'm asking you for anything right now, it's not trust all at once. It's enough room to prove whether I mean what I'm saying. Nadia picked up the attorney's number at last. She held the paper between 2 fingers like it might still disappear if she looked away. Owen has school registration forms due next week, she said after a moment, almost as if speaking to herself. Lila needs a signature from a guardian for an art program. Benji's teacher keeps asking for emergency contact updates. Daniel heard the weight behind each item. Pressure points. Then we start there, he said. She looked at him long and hard, then tucked the paper into the pocket of her apron. And just as Daniel felt the first fragile piece of forward movement settle between them, Irene appeared at the glass again, pale this time, and raised a hand for him to come out. When he opened the door, she lowered her voice. Daniel, your Aunt Evelyn is on line 1. She says if Nadia Vale is in that room, you need to hang up the phone in front of her. Daniel looked at Irene for 1 beat too long, then reached past her and picked up the ringing office line himself. He did not leave the conference room. He wanted that to be the first answer his aunt received. Nadia saw that choice and said nothing, but her eyes followed him as he pressed the speaker button and set the receiver on the table between them. The room carried every small sound now, the soft buzz of the line, the distant clink of cutlery in the dining room, the low breath Nadia took and held. Then Evelyn Rourke's voice filled the space, cool and polished, carrying the old family habit of sounding composed before anyone had earned the right to relax. Daniel, she said, tell me you are not making a spectacle of this. He stayed standing. Hello to you too, Evelyn. I'm not calling for manners. A pause, the faint rustle of papers on her end. Gerald tells me you've pulled archived materials tied to the Vale matter and that you've involved the girl herself. If that is true, stop now. Nadia's face did not change at the phrase, the girl herself, but Daniel felt the insult land anyway. He kept his voice even. Her name is Nadia. Evelyn ignored that. I don't care what her name is. I care that you're dragging dead business into the present as if grief becomes more noble when repeated out loud. Nadia looked down at the witness sheet in front of her, and Daniel felt a sharp flash of shame that this woman belonged to his blood. You knew, he said. I knew enough, Evelyn replied. Enough to understand that Malcolm took the least destructive option available at the time. Daniel let the silence after that stretch just long enough for her own words to settle on themselves. Least destructive. A man died, he said. A family collapsed. Their claim was buried. That's your least destructive option? Evelyn exhaled, a sound of practiced patience. You are too young to understand what those years were like. The holdings were over-leveraged. One admission of fault could have brought lenders down on everything. Your father was trying to save a larger structure. Nadia's hand tightened on the edge of the table. Daniel heard the same language again. Structure, exposure, the same old architecture of excuse. He glanced at her once, then back at the phone. Did you tell Gerald Pike to intervene? Yes, Evelyn said without hesitation this time. Because Gerald understands discretion, and because you have always had a weakness for mistaking guilt for leadership. The sentence was so direct it almost relieved him. No more family fog, no more vague concern, just the thing itself. Did you know the settlement had been approved before Malcolm refused it? He asked. Another pause, short. Then, I knew there was a recommendation. Recommendations are not verdicts. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. He could picture her exactly, even without seeing her. Immaculate, upright, speaking into a landline in a room that had never once required her to explain herself to anyone poorer than she was. Nadia spoke then, very quietly. Did you ever meet my mother? The line went still. When Evelyn answered, her voice had changed by only a hair. Once. And did you look at her, Nadia asked, while your family decided whether her children could stay together? Daniel felt something in the room tighten all over again. Evelyn did not respond immediately. In the background on her end, a clock chimed a single note. I met a great many distressed people during that period, she said at last. I did not manage individual outcomes. Nadia gave one short nod, more to herself than to the phone. That means yes, she said. Daniel stepped closer to the table. Why was her claim closed without payment if witness statements already pointed to prior electrical complaints? Evelyn's tone hardened. Because proof in a courtroom is not the same as rumor in a hallway. Because contractors share fault. Because insurers reduce risk where they can. Because families with responsibilities sometimes make choices sentimental people later pretend were monstrous. Daniel almost interrupted, but Nadia lifted one hand slightly without looking at him, asking for another second. Then she leaned toward the speaker. My brother, she said, still thinks if he eats slower, the food lasts longer. My sister hides school forms when they cost money. My little brother once asked me if bread tastes better warm, because he remembered that from before everything burned down. Her voice did not rise. That made it worse. So if you want to explain structure and responsibility, explain it to them. Evelyn did not answer the children. She answered Daniel. If you proceed with this, you risk far more than a public embarrassment. Board exposure, shareholder panic, litigation from tenants we thought were finished. You are custodian of a name, Daniel, not owner of a private conscience project. That sentence settled something in him. For years, he had let older voices in the family define adulthood as the ability to swallow what hurt other people and keep the machine moving. He heard it clearly now. He also heard how tired Nadia sounded just sitting 3 feet away, still in her apron, still needing to think about school pickup and dinner and rent, while his aunt argued for silence like it was wisdom. I'm done protecting the name from the truth, he said. Evelyn's voice cooled further. Then you are choosing badly. Maybe, Daniel said, but I'm choosing with my eyes open. He ended the call before she could answer. The conference room fell quiet again except for the small electronic click of the dead line. Daniel set the receiver back in its cradle with more care than he felt. Nadia stayed still for a moment, then rubbed once at the bridge of her nose, as if the effort of remaining upright had become physical. "She knew," she said. It was not a question anymore. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Nadia looked at the witness pages, then at him. "Then you have more than one person to confront." He was about to answer when his phone lit up on the table. A new message had come in from an unknown number, and attached to it was a photograph of a thin paper envelope Daniel had never seen before. Across the front, in faded handwriting, were 4 words. "For Nadia, when older." Daniel stared at the message, then turned the phone so Nadia could see it. The photograph had been taken in poor light. The envelope looked old, edges softened by years, one corner bent inward. The handwriting across the front was slanted and uneven, the kind that comes from writing while tired or upset. "For Nadia, when older." She leaned closer, and Daniel saw the exact second recognition struck. Her breath caught, not loudly, just enough. "That's my mother's handwriting," she said. He looked back at the screen. Unknown number, no name attached, no message body beyond the image itself. He tapped the number and called immediately. 1 ring, 2, then voicemail. No recorded name, only a generic tone. He disconnected and dialed again, same result. Nadia was still looking at the photograph as if it might open by force of memory alone. "She used to label things like that," she said quietly. "Jars, receipts, school shoes in boxes. If she thought something mattered, she wrote exactly what it was for." Daniel saved the image and forwarded it to his private email, then to a secure folder. His hands were steady now in the way they got when something practical could be done. "We traced the number," he said. Nadia gave the smallest shake of her head. "And if it's blocked behind an app or a throwaway?" He met her eyes. "Then we find another way." He stepped into the corridor with Irene and asked her to cover the floor without Nadia for the rest of lunch. Irene looked from his face to Nadia's through the glass and asked no questions, only nodded. Daniel then called Mara, his executive assistant at the parent office. Her voice came on crisp and immediate. "I need a private trace on a number," he said, quietly, "and I need it now." Mara did not ask why. She simply said, "Send it." When he returned to the conference room, Nadia had finally sat back down. The witness statements and attorney's number were still in front of her. So was the image on his phone. The table had become a strange little map of her life, documents from a dead claim, help she did not know whether to accept, and now the possibility that something her mother meant her to see had survived all these years. "Who would have it?" Daniel asked. Nadia rubbed her thumb over the edge of the printed witness sheet. "Could be anyone who was around after the fire. A neighbor, someone from the bakery, maybe Mrs. Hensley if she kept things. Maybe one of the women from church who helped pack up what was left when we moved." She hesitated. Or what?" Daniel asked. "Or somebody in your family kept it." The thought landed between them and stayed there. He could not dismiss it. Evelyn had known more than she admitted. Gerald had moved too fast. If an envelope written by Nadia's mother still existed, it had passed through hands that made choices. Before Daniel could respond, Mara texted back. "Number registered to a prepaid line, purchased 3 days earlier. Last active ping from a neighborhood 2 blocks from Nadia's apartment." He showed her. Nadia read it once and then lifted her head sharply. "2 blocks from us?" Daniel nodded. The conference room suddenly felt less like a place of paperwork and more like a pressure point. Whoever had sent the photo knew where Nadia lived, or at least knew the area well enough to move through it. "I need to go home," she said, already reaching for the folded note with the attorney's number and tucking it deeper into her apron pocket. "If somebody's near the kids," Daniel was on his feet before she finished. "I'm driving you." She started to refuse on reflex. He saw it in the set of her mouth. Then she thought of Owen, Lila, and Benji, and practicality won over pride. "Fine,"
she said.
But if we get there and this is some game your family is playing, I want to know exactly what kind. He did not answer that because he did not yet know himself. They left through the service corridor instead of the dining room. The kitchen heat hit them first, carrying rosemary, butter, charred onions, and the sharp, clean steam from the dish pit. Staff moved around them with practiced speed. A line cook glanced up, saw Daniel beside Nadia, and quickly looked back down at his station. The distance between owner and waitress always drew attention. Today it felt almost theatrical, though neither of them had room left for self-consciousness. Outside, the alley was brighter than it had been the night Daniel had watched her leave in secret. Delivery crates stacked by the dumpster, pigeons lifting from a patch of spilled rice, a trash truck grumbling at the far end of the block. They crossed quickly to his car. The drive out was tense in that quiet way that feels louder than argument. Nadia sat rigid in the passenger seat, one hand gripping her phone, the other braced against the door handle whenever they hit a rough patch in the road.
Daniel kept glancing at her neighborhood as they approached, noticing details he had missed that first night while following her in suspicion. A boarded corner shop with faded posters still taped inside the glass, a laundromat with one machine half dismantled near the window, kids' bikes chained to a railing too low to matter. He could smell rain coming, though the sky had not broken yet, that metallic dampness that settles over cracked pavement before a storm. When they turned onto her block, Nadia leaned forward. "There," she said. A man stood outside the tenement entrance, half in shade, half in sun, holding a paper envelope in one hand. He was older, thin, with a cap pulled low and a nervous way of shifting his weight from heel to toe. Not Gerald. Not family. Not someone Daniel recognized. But when the car slowed, the man looked straight at Nadia first, and then at Daniel, and his face tightened like he had just realized the story had arrived with the wrong witness. Nadia had her door open before Daniel fully stopped the car, and the man took one step back and said, "I was told to give this to her only if Rourke finally came in person." Nadia stopped so abruptly the car door stayed half open behind her. The man by the entrance lifted both hands a little, just careful, the way people do when they know fear is reasonable. Up close, he looked older than Daniel had first thought, his face lined deep around the mouth, his jacket shiny at the elbows, fingers stained faintly with tobacco. The paper envelope in his hand was thicker than a letter should have been. Daniel stepped out from the driver's side and came around the hood slowly, watching the man's eyes. They never really settled on him. They kept returning to Nadia, as if she were the person who mattered, and Daniel was only the key required to unlock the rest. "Who told you that?" Nadia asked. The man wet his lips before answering. "Marlene Hensley," he said. "Before she got moved to the care place upstate. She said if Rourke ever came here for real, and not to threaten or stall, this should go to you." Daniel heard the name and felt the thread tighten. Mrs. Hensley, the witness from the bakery. Nadia took one step closer. "You know Mrs. Hensley?" "She's my aunt," he said. "Name's Victor. I fix radiators when they let me. I saw the message come through this morning and figured it was time." The street felt suddenly too exposed for what was happening on it. Laundry moved on a line above them in the damp wind. Somewhere down the block, a radio played softly through an open window. A bus hissed at the corner and pulled away. Nadia held out her hand, but Victor did not give her the envelope yet. "I need to say this first," he told her. "My aunt kept that because your mother asked her to, if anything ever happened. She also said the wrong people might try to get it if the case ever came up again. That's why I waited to see him with you." His chin tilted toward Daniel, just as a fact. "No offense, but your last name ain't earned trust around here." Daniel accepted that without protest. He would have distrusted himself, too. "Let me take it inside," Nadia said. "My brother and sister are upstairs." Victor hesitated, then passed the envelope over. The paper made a soft, dry sound in her fingers. It had been sealed once, then taped again later with yellowing strips that no longer held cleanly at the edges. Daniel saw her thumb hover over the handwriting,
for Nadia when older, as if touching it too fast might pull something apart in her. Victor leaned in slightly. "There's more than a letter in there," he said. "My aunt said not to open it in the street." Nadia nodded. Daniel glanced toward the building. "Let's go up." They climbed the stairs quickly. The stairwell smelled of damp plaster, frying onions from someone's lunch, and the metallic old building scent of hot pipes and dust. Benji opened the apartment door before Nadia could knock, and relief flashed across his face when he saw her. "You're early," he said, then looked at Daniel and Victor and went instantly quiet. Children know when adult air is wrong. Owen appeared behind him, already tense, shoulders set. Lila stood farther back with a pencil tucked into her hair and worry all over her face. Nadia crouched first because that was what she always did. "Everything's okay," she told them, though the envelope in her hand contradicted the sentence. "I just needed to come home for a little while." Owen's eyes went to Daniel anyway. "What happened?" Nadia answered honestly enough to calm him without lying. "Something from before showed up. We need to look at it." Inside, the apartment felt even smaller with extra bodies in it. Daniel stayed near the doorway at first out of instinct, until Benji dragged one of the folding chairs by a leg and set it down with a scrape. "You can sit if you want," he said. The simple offer struck Daniel harder than he expected. He sat. Victor remained standing by the radiator, hat in both hands. Nadia cleared a space on the table between a spelling worksheet, a bowl with 3 apples, and the rent envelope she had not managed to hide quickly enough this time. Owen stood beside her instead of sitting. Lila came closer but kept one hand on Benji's shoulder. Household objects again. School papers, fruit counted carefully, a cracked mug holding pens. Evidence of a life stretched thin and still being kept in order. Nadia peeled back the old tape. Inside was a folded letter, 2 photographs, and a small metal key taped to an index card. The sight of the key made Victor nod once, as if confirming something to himself. Nadia unfolded the letter first. Her mother's handwriting filled both sides of the page, narrower and more hurried than the words on the envelope. She began to read silently, and Daniel watched her face instead of the paper. First tension, then shock, then a softness so painful it hardly looked like relief at all. Her lips moved once around a line she did not voice. Owen leaned in. "What does it say?" She did not answer immediately. She read to the bottom, turned the page over, then looked at the index card with the key attached. "What?" Owen pressed again, more frightened now. Nadia lifted her eyes slowly. "My mother wrote this after the meetings with the company started," she said. Her voice had changed. It was thinner and steadier at the same time. "She says if I'm reading it, then she was right not to trust them." Daniel felt Victor watching him from across the room. Nadia looked back down. "She wrote that Mrs. Hensley kept copies of things because somebody from the company warned my mother to stop keeping papers in the apartment." Lila covered her mouth with one hand. Benji looked from face to face, lost. Owen said, "Copies of what?" Nadia turned the letter and read one line aloud this time. "Proof that they knew before the fire." Then she looked at the key on the card and read the next line in a whisper. "It's in a bakery tin, in the storage locker under Mrs. Hensley's old church." The words hung in the apartment long enough for even Benji to understand that something serious had just entered the room. Owen stepped closer to Nadia at once, almost without thinking, shoulder near hers in that protective way he had learned too young. Lila looked from Victor to Daniel, then to the small key taped to the index card, trying to fit adult danger into child-sized understanding. Nadia kept the letter in one hand and the card in the other. Her face had gone pale, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "What church?" she asked. Victor answered quickly, as if he had rehearsed the line and wanted it out. "St. Bartholomew's old annex, the one near the closed grocery yard, 3 blocks over from where the bakery used to be. My aunt cleaned there part-time after the fire. She rented a storage locker in the basement for years. Said nobody from the company would think to look in a church utility room." Daniel felt the logic of that immediately. Hidden in plain sight, protected by being beneath notice. Nadia unfolded the letter again and scanned lower down. "There's a locker number," she said, "and a name." Her throat moved. "My mother used Mrs. Hensley's church key deposit because she didn't trust keeping copies with us." Daniel looked toward the children. The room had gone still around the table. The refrigerator motor hummed. Somewhere above them, a pipe clicked twice. Everyday sounds, and right in the center of them sat a possibility that could change everything. He asked the practical question first because that was the only kind that helped in moments like this. "Is the church still open?" Victor nodded. "Main chapel on Sundays, soup pantry twice a week. Annex is mostly locked now, basement hardly used except for seasonal storage." He shifted his cap in both hands. "I can take you." Nadia looked toward the hallway where the children's coats hung from hooks. The conflict in her face was immediate and brutal. Go now while the trail was warm. Stay because her brother and sister and little one were here. Daniel saw it and spoke before she had to choose alone. "I'll go with Victor," he said. "You stay with them." Nadia's head snapped toward him. "No." It was not anger, it was instinct. "That key was left for me," she said. "If there's something in that locker, I'm the one opening it." Owen spoke up then, voice lower than his age should have made it. "I can stay with Lila and Benji." Nadia turned to him at once. "No, I'm not leaving you three with all this hanging over us." Daniel could hear the old pattern in her answer. She would split herself before she let any one piece go uncovered. He understood it now. He also understood time. If anyone else had learned the envelope existed, if Evelyn or Gerald or anyone in their orbit started pulling the same thread, delay could matter. "Then we do this carefully," Daniel said. "Victor takes us. Irene can come here and stay with the kids until we're back. She already knows enough to understand this isn't ordinary." Nadia hesitated. She trusted almost nobody, and rightly so. But Irene had been kind before any of this. Honest, too. Nadia looked at Owen, then at Lila, who gave a tiny nod that seemed older than she was. Benji had climbed into the chair Daniel had been using and was tracing the edge of the table with one finger, watching all the adults for the answer to a question he could not yet phrase. Nadia exhaled slowly. "Call her," she said. Daniel stepped aside and made the call in the kitchenette, near the sink where the dish soap smelled faintly of citrus. Irene answered on the second ring. He told her only what mattered. Nadia had to leave briefly. The children could not be left alone. Could she come? Irene did not ask for explanation, only address confirmation and how soon. 20 minutes, she said. Maybe less. When he returned to the table, Nadia had reread the letter twice more and had found one more line buried near the bottom. She wrote that if the company ever denied knowing about the wiring, the tin would prove they were warned before the contractors finished. Her voice almost failed on the last word, but held. Daniel felt the room narrow around that sentence. Victor shifted by the radiator. "There's something else," he said. Everyone looked at him. "My aunt told me one more thing when she handed me the envelope. She said if a Rourke came, I was to watch whether he rushed to touch the papers first. Said if he did, he was only there to contain it." Daniel accepted the hit because he understood it. Nadia's eyes rested on him for a long second. Then she folded the letter very carefully and slid it back into the envelope. "You didn't touch it," Victor said, almost surprised. Daniel answered plainly, "It isn't mine." That seemed to settle something, though not everything. Irene arrived sooner than promised, slightly breathless, cardigan thrown over her uniform blouse, keys still in hand. She took in the room in one sweep, the children, Victor, the envelope, Nadia's face, Daniel's jacket still unbuttoned from the drive, and said only, "Tell me what you need." Nadia crossed to her and spoke in a low voice near the sink. Owen tried to act older than he was, explaining where the spare flashlights were if the hall power flickered and which neighbor to knock for if Benji got nervous. Lila packed up her school papers to make space, then tucked the apples into a bowl as if tidying something could steady the room. Benji finally asked,
Are you going to where our mom used to work? Nadia crouched and smoothed his hair back. Near it, she said, and I'm coming back. He studied her, then looked at Daniel. You too? Daniel nodded. Me too. They left just as the first drops of rain began to tap against the stairwell window. The sky had gone heavy and low. Victor climbed into the back seat of Daniel's car, directing them turn by turn through side streets that smelled of wet pavement and old brick. Nadia sat in front with the envelope in her lap, one hand over it the entire drive. Nobody spoke much. There was too much in motion for conversation to do anything useful. Past a shuttered grocery yard, past the lot where the bakery had once stood, now fenced and paved, so plain it was almost insulting. Then, finally, the church annex came into view. Narrow stone building, side door under a rusting awning, basement steps slick with rain. Victor pointed toward the locked lower entrance. That's it, he said. Lockers down there. Nadia reached for the key and froze. The padlock on the basement door was hanging open. For one suspended second, the only sound was rain ticking against the church awning. Nadia still had the key in her hand, but it was suddenly useless. The basement door stood ajar by less than an inch, just enough for damp air to breathe up from below. The old brass padlock hung open from the latch, bumping softly against the metal whenever the wind pushed at it. Victor muttered something under his breath and stepped back. That was locked when I checked 2 weeks ago, he said. Daniel believed him. Nobody used a half-open church basement by accident in weather like this. Nadia moved first. She went down the wet steps quickly, one hand on the railing, the envelope tucked hard under her arm to protect it from the rain. Daniel followed just behind her, close enough to catch her if the slick concrete betrayed either of them. The lower doorway smelled of wet stone, old paper, and that sour, dusty odor closed basements get when they have held too much storage and too little light for too many years. Victor stayed at the top of the steps at first, scanning the street the way men do when they have spent time in neighborhoods where other people's trouble can become yours without warning. Then he came down too and pulled the door wider. Inside, the corridor was narrow and lined with wire storage cages, stacked folding tables, dented donation bins, boxes of holiday decorations, a broken oscillating fan, and a row of paint cans fused to the floor by time. One bulb burned overhead in a weak yellow cone. Another farther in was dead. Rainwater dripped somewhere out of sight, steady and patient. Nadia looked at the index card from her mother's letter. Locker 17, she said. They found it at the far end. The small wire cage stood open. The cheap latch had been cut clean through. A few twisted metal curls lay on the floor below it, still bright where the old rust had broken away. Inside there was empty space, a circle of dust where something round had once sat, and one strip of floral tin edging caught under the back corner like a torn fingernail. Nadia crouched immediately and picked it up. Blue enamel, tiny faded white daisies. My mother kept cookies in a tin like this, she whispered, from the bakery counter. Daniel knelt too, scanning the floor, the shelf beneath, the gaps between lockers. There were scuff marks in the dust leading away, fresh enough to disturb the settled gray surface. Someone had been here recently, maybe hours ago. Victor swore softly this time, with no attempt to hide it. Somebody beat us. Nadia remained crouched, the strip of tin in one hand, the useless key in the other. Daniel could see the blow move through her, even though she made almost no sound. She had carried hope down those steps, and now had to put it somewhere. He kept looking, refusing the first version of defeat. If someone opened it fast, he said, they may have dropped something. He took out his phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam pushed into corners the ceiling light barely reached. Dust, a dead moth, a church bulletin from 3 Christmases ago under the next cage. Then, beneath the bottom rail of locker 17, a folded square of paper, damp at one edge. Daniel reached for it carefully and held it up. It was a torn piece of ruled notebook paper, folded twice. Nadia stood. What is it?
He opened it. Only one line, written in a hurried block print that was not her mother's handwriting and not elegant enough to be Evelyn's or Gerald's. Too late. Try the office. Victor frowned. What office? Nadia answered before Daniel could. The bakery office. Her voice had gone thin again, stretched by memory and urgency. There was a tiny upstairs room above the back prep space. My father did invoices there. If the lot hasn't been fully rebuilt... She stopped herself because they all knew what stood where the bakery had once been now. Fence, pavement, blank utility shed at the edge of a redeveloped block. Daniel thought quickly. Could anything from the old building still exist? A rear storage room? An access box? Contractor shed? Victor rubbed rain from his forehead with the heel of his hand. There's an old service structure near the fenced lot. Been locked forever. People say it used to connect to the back of the original property before demolition. Nadia looked from the note to Daniel. If someone moved the tin, why leave that message? It was the right question. Not a taunt, exactly. More like a redirection. But from whom? Someone helping them stay one step behind? Or someone trying to draw them towards something else? Daniel turned the note over, blank except for a greasy thumbprint in one corner. No company letterhead. No clue beyond urgency and the word office. He scanned the corridor once more, and that was when he noticed another detail. On the floor beside the cut latch, half caught in the puddled edge of water tracked in from outside, was a tiny plastic tag from a keyring. Printed on it in fading black letters were 3 characters: E-R. Daniel stared at it a beat too long before picking it up. Nadia saw his face and held out her hand. He placed the tag in her palm. She looked down. E-R. Victor leaned in. Could stand for anything. Yes, Daniel said. But he did not believe that. Neither did Nadia. The rain outside intensified, drumming harder against the metal awning above the basement steps. Somewhere upstairs, a church door opened and shut. Voices passing faintly overhead, unaware of the small crime scene below their feet. Daniel rose and took a slow breath. We leave nothing here, he said. Victor, photograph the cut latch, the empty cage, the tin strip, everything. Nadia, keep the note and the tag. We go to the lot next. Nadia was already folding the scrap of paper back into itself, movements sharp now, focused. Hurt had narrowed into action. As they turned to leave, Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. It was Mara. He answered at once. Tell me you found something. Her voice came low and urgent through the line. I did. Security logs from the parent office show someone accessed the old property key archive this morning under Evelyn Rourke's credentials. She paused just long enough for his chest to tighten. And Daniel, there's a second access from an hour ago, tied to one of your restaurant master keys. Daniel stopped at the foot of the basement stairs and listened to Mara's words a second time, as if hearing them differently might soften them. It's tied to which key? He asked. The audit doesn't show the holder's name directly, Mara said. Only the tag route. It's from the flagship set, Daniel. One of the secure copies logged out under override access. Rain thudded overhead. Nadia and Victor were both watching him now. Mara went on, her voice clipped and efficient. Someone used that access to open the archived property key box the same hour the church locker was breached. I can send the full record, but you need to know this fast. Whoever is moving knows both your family systems and your restaurant systems. Daniel closed his eyes for half a beat. Inside his world, that narrowed the circle. Not random, not distant. Someone close enough to know procedures. Someone who could move between company layers without tripping alarms until now. When he ended the call, Nadia did not ask him to protect her from the answer. What is it? She said. He told her plainly. The church locker was not the only thing accessed. Someone used override credentials connected to my flagship restaurant to get at old property keys. Victor frowned. You saying this is one of your own people? Daniel shook his head once. I'm saying whoever did it knew how to move through my business without looking like a break-in. Nadia looked back toward the empty cage, then at the strip of tin in her hand. So while we were in that conference room, somebody was already here. The thought made the basement feel smaller and uglier all at once. Daniel nodded. Yes. For a moment, nobody spoke. The weak bulb hummed overhead. Rainwater crept under the outer door in a thin line and pooled along the cracked concrete seam. Nadia slid the scrap note and the key tag into the envelope with her mother's letter, sealing all of it under one hand against her chest. Then she said the only useful thing left to say. We go to the lot. Victor led them back into the rain. The church steps shone dark and slick. Daniel pulled open the car doors quickly, and this time there was no hesitation in anyone's movements. The search had become a race. On the drive, Mara sent the audit logs to Daniel's phone. At a red light, he scanned the entries. Evelyn's credentials at the parent office, just as Mara had said. Then the second line. Override release authorized by hotel restaurant operations. Timestamp from less than 90 minutes earlier. Daniel's mouth went dry. That kind of override required either him, his operations director, or someone with temporary executive code from admin. He had not given one. Which meant one of two things: a theft from inside, or a permission chain built by someone who assumed he would never look. The old bakery lot sat behind a chain-link fence between a paved loading zone and an empty parcel overgrown with weeds. Rain darkened the asphalt and turned the weeds glossy black-green. Victor pointed to a squat service structure near the far edge, half cinder block, half sheet metal, ugly enough to be overlooked forever. That's what I meant, he said. Used to be utility access when the old building was still standing. Nadia was already out of the car, shoes splashing through shallow runoff. Daniel followed, the fence cold and wet under his hands as Victor worked the side gate latch. It stuck once, then gave with a squeal. Inside the fenced area, the ground smelled of wet dust, oil, and old concrete baked too many summers. Nadia stared at the service structure as if trying to see the bakery layered over it. The back hallway, the office stairs, the place where her father once kept invoices and receipts. Daniel saw it on her face, that painful act of remembering a place through what had replaced it. The metal door to the utility shed stood closed, but the hasp around its lock showed fresh scratches. Someone had been there recently, too. Victor tried the handle, locked. Nadia pulled the tiny key from the envelope and held it out without speaking. It was too small for the outer padlock. Daniel took it and crouched, studying the frame. Near the bottom right corner, hidden behind a rusted conduit pipe, was a second keyhole set into a narrow inner access panel. There, he said. Nadia knelt beside him, rain gathering in her hair. Her hands shook once as she passed him the key. It slid in with resistance, then turned. Behind the narrow panel was a cavity barely wider than a filing drawer, and inside it sat the bakery tin. For one suspended breath, nobody moved. Blue with white daisies, just like the broken strip from the church locker, dented along one side. Wrapped in a grocery bag yellowed by time, Nadia reached in before Daniel could ask permission and lifted it out with both hands. The metal was cold and left rust dust on her fingers. She held it against herself for a second, eyes shut, the way people hold something that has survived longer than it should have. Then she set it carefully on the hood of Daniel's car. The lid was tied shut with faded kitchen twine. Victor stepped back to give her space. Rain drummed on the car roof, the fence, the shed. Traffic hissed on the avenue beyond the lot. Nadia untied the twine slowly, almost reverently, and lifted the lid. Inside were copies. A whole compressed history of resistance. Maintenance complaints, insurance letters, handwritten notes, a partial invoice book. 3 photographs of blackened wiring near the back wall by the prep area. And on top, protected in a clear sleeve, a page with several signatures and one stamped acknowledgement from Rourke Urban Holdings, confirming receipt of prior hazard notice before the fire. Daniel saw Nadia's face as she read the date. It was days before her father died. Victor crossed himself under his breath. Daniel felt the force of it like a physical blow. Proof. Not rumor. Not memory bending under grief. Proof. Then Nadia pulled one more item from the bottom of the tin. It was a cassette-sized digital recorder, older model, wrapped in a dish towel. A label in her mother's handwriting was taped across it. Meeting with Evelyn. Keep safe. For a moment, even the rain seemed to pull back from the sound of that label. Meeting with Evelyn. Keep safe. Nadia held the recorder as if it might break from being looked at too hard. It was small, older than most people kept anymore, with a scratched display window and a thumb-sized play button worn pale at the edges. The dish towel around it smelled faintly of flour even after all these years, and that detail hit her harder than the papers had. Flour. Bakery air. A life before lawsuits and bus fare and counting envelopes on a kitchen table. Victor let out a breath through his teeth. My aunt never mentioned a recording, he said. Daniel looked into the tin again, forcing himself to catalog instead of react. Hazard notices, signed receipt, wiring photos, a folded contractor invoice with handwritten initials in the corner. Enough on its own to shatter the family's version of events. But the recorder, that was different. Paper can be denied, questioned, delayed. A voice is harder to bury once it's heard. Nadia ran her thumb over the label once, then looked at Daniel. Can we play it? He took the recorder gently and turned it over. Battery compartment on the back. Tiny port on the side. No charger in the tin, no spare batteries, nothing else. Not here, he said. Not safely. He did not like the open lot, the cut church locker, the audit log, the fact that somebody else had been one step ahead all afternoon. Victor nodded toward the fence. You shouldn't stand out here any longer than you have to. If someone came for the church tin, they may circle back when they realize you found the second place. Nadia heard that and instinctively gathered everything closer, stacking the papers back into the tin with a care that looked almost parental. Daniel took off his coat and wrapped it around the whole bundle before carrying it to the car. By the time they got inside, the windshield had gone silver with rain. He drove first to a small electronics shop tucked behind one of his mid-market restaurants, a place he knew because the owner had once fixed a private audio system for a company event on a Sunday with no notice. Daniel called ahead from the car. I need old playback hardware, he said, today, quietly. The shopkeeper, Leon, was one of those men who asked no questions if he respected the voice on the phone. 10 minutes later, Daniel was carrying out 2 batteries, an adapter cable, and a portable speaker no larger than a paperback. Nadia waited in the passenger seat with the tin on her lap, both hands resting on it. Victor followed behind them in his own truck now, at Daniel's request. Nobody said it out loud, but they had all accepted the same fact. After what they had found, nobody should be alone. They did not go back to the apartment. Daniel chose a private office suite above one of his quieter restaurants, a place rarely used except for supplier reviews and seasonal menu planning. Neutral ground, not family property in the old sense, not Nadia's home, not the flagship where too many eyes already watched him. The room smelled faintly of coffee beans, cardboard, and fresh paint from a recent repair. One window looked over an alley slick with rain. Nadia set the tin on the conference table there and took the recorder out again. Her hands were steadier now, but only because she had moved beyond shock and into that harder state where people function because there is no one else to do it. Daniel opened the battery compartment. Old cells inside, corroded lightly at one end. He replaced them, cleaned the contact with the corner of a tissue, and waited. The screen blinked once, then came alive in dim green numbers. Nobody breathed normally after that. He connected the speaker. The recorder clicked. Static hissed through the small room, thin and ghostly. Nadia pressed her palm flat against the table. Victor stood by the door, cap in both hands again, staring at the device as if it were a witness about to step into the room. Daniel hit play. At first, there was only scraping, fabric movement,
somebody setting something down too close to the microphone. Then a woman's voice, tired and strained, but unmistakably composed. Nadia closed her eyes instantly. "That's my mother," she whispered. Rosevale, younger than memory had left her, but there, alive inside a machine. A second voice followed a few seconds later, cool and clipped, impossible to mistake even without introduction. Evelyn Rourke. The room seemed to constrict around the sound of her. The recording was not perfect. Rain or traffic somewhere outside, paper being moved, a chair leg dragging. Rose speaking first, saying she had brought copies of the hazard notices and the contractor bills, saying she wanted acknowledgement that the company had known the bakery wiring was unsafe before the fire. Evelyn answered with the same tone Daniel had heard on speaker earlier that day, only younger, sharper. She did not deny knowledge outright. She talked around it. Said the company could not officially concede pre-loss awareness while financing discussions were still active. Rose asked, very clearly, "So you did know?" Silence. Evelyn said the sentence that made Daniel grip the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. "We knew enough to avoid putting it in writing." Nadia opened her eyes. The recording crackled, shifted, and Rose's voice came again, shaking now, but not broken. She said, "My children will pay for that." Evelyn answered immediately, too quickly, as if irritation had outrun caution. "Your children will suffer far more if you force us into a public fight you cannot afford." The speaker gave a sharp burst of static. The file skipped. Daniel looked down at the recorder. The waveform light still moved, but the sound had fractured. A mechanical stutter, then silence, then half a word, then silence again. Nadia leaned forward so fast her chair legs scraped the floor. "No," she said, almost under her breath. "No, no, no." Daniel stopped playback, rewound a few seconds, tried again. Static. A clipped fragment of Rose's voice, nothing but hiss. He checked the file counter. There was more time left on the recording, much more. And then he saw the tiny crack running across the memory panel near the side port, and realized someone had damaged the device, but not enough to erase it all. Daniel leaned over the recorder again, staring at the hairline crack near the memory panel, as if concentration alone might undo damage done years ago. The room above the quiet restaurant had grown darker with evening rain, and the small desk lamp threw a yellow pool across the table where the tin sat open between them. Nadia had not moved far from it. Her hands were wrapped around a cooling mug of tea Irene had sent up from downstairs, though she had not taken a sip. Victor stood near the window now, looking out into the alley as if he could guard them by sheer attention. On the speaker, the last trace of static still seemed to linger in the silence that followed the cut-off recording. They had heard enough to know what Evelyn had said, enough to know Rose had been right. But there was more trapped inside that damaged device, and everyone in the room felt it. "Can it be recovered?" Nadia asked. Daniel looked up. "Maybe." He chose the word carefully because anything else would have been false comfort. "If the chip isn't shattered, a specialist may be able to pull the file directly. If it's just the casing or the port connection, we have a chance." Nadia nodded once. She had become very economical with movement when hope was involved. Too much hope wasted energy she could not afford. "Then we don't wait until morning," she said. Daniel was already reaching for his phone. "I'm not." He called Leon back first. Leon knew electronics, but more importantly, he knew people who knew older electronics. After 2 rings, the man picked up with shop noise in the background, drawer slides, packaging tape, muted radio. Daniel described the recorder, the crack, the partial playback. Leon did not waste time pretending certainty. "I know one woman," he said, "Marisol Trent. She does forensic audio work for archives and legal firms sometimes, works nights when it matters. If she says she'll look, that means she thinks there's something left to save." Daniel wrote down the address she texted him a moment later. Industrial block, side entrance. "Bring no magnets.
Leon added, as if Daniel carried magnets around for fun. Daniel almost smiled at that, but the feeling did not quite reach his face. Within 15 minutes, they were moving again. Nadia refused to be left behind for this part, and Daniel did not argue. The recorder stayed in her hands the entire drive, wrapped in the dish towel from the bakery tin like something both fragile and holy. Victor followed again in his truck because he had crossed too far into the story now to step politely back out of it. The city outside had thinned into wet streets, loading docks, and after-hours lights in windows where people still worked long after most others had gone home. Marisol's studio sat above a closed print shop, hidden behind a plain steel door with no sign except a buzz panel and a faint blue light over the frame. She opened the door herself. Marisol Trent was in her 50s, small, silver-haired, wearing headphones around her neck and reading glasses pushed up into her hair. The hallway behind her smelled faintly of solder, dust, and hot circuits. She looked at Daniel once, registered expense and urgency, then looked straight past him to the towel-wrapped recorder in Nadia's hands. "That's the thing that matters," she said. "Come in." No wasted social friction. Daniel liked her instantly for that. The studio inside was warm and cluttered in an orderly way. Waveform monitors, old decks, digitizing stations, labeled cables, acoustic foam on the walls. A kettle hissed softly in a side room. Marisol cleared a space on the central bench and held out both hands. Nadia hesitated, then passed the recorder over. Marisol worked in silence for the first minute, examining the casing under a lamp. Then she gave a low sound through her nose. Somebody trying to compromise it without making the damage obvious. Nadia's shoulders tightened. "Recently?" Marisol shook her head. "Could be old, could be years old. This wasn't a drop. Someone pressed on the panel edge with purpose. Maybe trying to stop playback, maybe trying to corrupt transfer." Daniel felt cold move through him, despite the heat of the room. Even this. Someone had reached for the voice, not just the paper. Marisol glanced up. "Do you need chain of custody language, or do you need the truth first?" Daniel answered at once. "Truth first." She nodded. "Good. Sit down and keep quiet unless I ask." They waited while she opened the casing and connected a set of tiny clips to the memory board. The only sounds were the soft tap of keys, the hum of processors, and rain ticking faintly against the narrow window. Nadia sat forward, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on Marisol's screen. Daniel watched Nadia more than the monitor. He had learned by now that revelations mattered most in the face of the person they belonged to. Victor stood with his hands in his pockets, hat finally set aside, looking awkward and rooted at once. After several minutes, Marisol leaned closer to the waveform, adjusted a filter, and said, "There's more here. The file header is intact. The corruption begins midstream. I can isolate around the breaks." Then she hit play. Sasket came first again, thinner now. Rose's voice, Evelyn's voice, the line they had already heard. Then distortion, a crunch of data tearing, and after that, fragments reforming. Rose saying she would not sign anything that erased the warnings. Evelyn saying the family was offering practical compassion in place of public admission. Papers moving. Rose asking whether the company was refusing responsibility because children were cheaper than truth. Daniel saw Nadia flinch at that just once. Then came the clearest surviving stretch yet, Evelyn's voice sharp and stripped of polish by irritation. "If you force this, Mrs. Vale, the claim will be tied up until your children are old enough to forget what justice was supposed to look like." Nobody in the room moved. Marisol lifted a finger for silence and let the file run. Rose said something lower, harder to hear, about keeping copies elsewhere. Evelyn answered so softly they almost missed it. Marisol boosted the gain and replayed the last few seconds. The words came through thin but legible enough. "Then I hope for your sake," Evelyn said, "that your cleaning girl stays loyal." Nadia blinked once, sharply. Daniel turned to her.
cleaning girl?" he said. Nadia's voice came out almost as a whisper. "My mother's friend May worked part-time at your aunt's house that year." She looked back at Marisol, then at Daniel, the next realization already landing. If May heard that meeting, she may be the one who hid the copies before Mrs. Hensley kept them. Then her face changed again, this time with sudden alarm. And if Evelyn knew May heard? At that exact moment, Daniel's phone lit up with a call from Irene. He answered immediately. Her voice was low and tight. "Daniel, there are 2 people in suits outside Nadia's building asking the neighbors whether a woman named May Collins ever came around the family." Daniel was already moving before Irene finished the sentence. He switched the phone to speaker so Nadia could hear. Irene's voice came through low and controlled, but Daniel knew her well enough now to hear the strain under it. "They've been polite," she said, "which somehow makes it worse. One's asking the upstairs neighbor if an older woman named May Collins ever brought boxes here years ago. The other is pretending to check utility notices in the hallway." Nadia stood so quickly her chair nearly tipped. "Are the kids with you?" she asked. "Yes," Irene said. "Door locked. Owen wanted to go out and confront them. He didn't." Daniel closed his eyes for one brief second in gratitude for that. "Keep the children inside," he said. "Don't let anyone in unless you hear my voice or Nadia's. We're coming." Marisol, who had been silent through the call, stepped closer to the table. "Take copies, not originals," she said, already reaching for blank archival sleeves. Whoever is circling is still reacting. That makes this the most dangerous hour. Not because anyone's going to get violent, but because paper disappears fastest when people think they still have time. She moved with the crisp authority of someone who had seen evidence mishandled before. Within minutes, she had duplicated the recovered audio file onto 2 encrypted drives, photographed the papers from the tin at high resolution, and printed chain of custody receipts with timestamps. Daniel signed one. Nadia signed the other. Marisol handed Nadia a drive no larger than a key fob. "Keep that on your body," she said. "Do not put it in a purse, glove box, or kitchen drawer." Then she looked at Daniel. "And you need a lawyer who isn't afraid of your last name." "Working on that," he said. They split the materials the way Marisol advised. Originals sealed into one hard case with her, working copies and the repaired audio on Daniel and Nadia. Victor insisted on following them back again. By the time they reached Nadia's building, the rain had eased to a mist that made every streetlight halo. 2 men in dark coats stood near the stoop, exactly as Irene had described. One held a clipboard. The other had that bland, practiced posture of somebody trying to look like nothing at all. They turned when Daniel's car pulled up. The one with the clipboard recognized him first and, for a tiny second, misjudged the situation. He assumed Daniel's presence meant control. Then Nadia got out beside him, and that assumption died on the man's face. "Evening," Daniel said. "Mr. Rourke," the man replied, too smooth by half. "Routine building inquiry." "No," Daniel said. "You're looking for May Collins." The second man shifted his weight. "We don't discuss private searches with tenants." Nadia stepped forward. "I'm not a tenant in this conversation. I'm the reason for it." Her voice did not rise, but the hallway lights caught something in her face that made both men recalculate. Daniel took another step down the walk. "Who sent you?" The clipboard man gave the answer of someone still hoping the old family rules applied. "We're here on behalf of interested parties reviewing past property exposure." Daniel almost smiled at that. Almost. Wrong answer. He took out his phone, opened the voice memo app, and let them see he was recording. "Try again." They did not. Instead, the clipboard man glanced once at the upper windows, where Irene had already moved the children back from the curtain line, and said, "Mr. Rourke, this doesn't need to become a public misunderstanding." Daniel heard the sentence for what it was. A plea dressed as professionalism. He was done accepting those. "You came to a residential building asking neighbors about a witness tied to a suppressed claim," he said. "Leave now or your misunderstanding gets very public, very fast." The second man muttered something under his breath.
The first held Daniel's gaze a beat longer, then made a decision. "We'll report that contact was unproductive," he said. Daniel answered, "Report whatever helps you sleep, then go." They left without further performance, shoes splashing through gutter water, their car starting at the corner a few seconds later. Inside the apartment, Owen opened the door before Nadia could unlock it, and tried hard to look less scared than he was. Benji ran to her. Lila hung back, reading faces. Irene stood near the table with all 3 school folders stacked neatly out of the way, as if protecting order where she could. The room smelled of reheated soup, wet coats, and the faint sweet trace of bread warmed in a pan. Nadia knelt, held Benji, touched Owen's shoulder, kissed Lila's forehead. Daniel looked away for a second, suddenly aware that this too was evidence. Caregiving as labor, reflex, structure. The kind nobody had protected when the claim was first buried. Once the children were settled in the next room with Irene, Victor spoke the question all the adults had been circling. Who's May Collins exactly? Nadia stood by the sink, one hand resting on the counter like she needed its steadiness. "She was my mother's friend," she said. "Worked housekeeping jobs all over, including for a while at Evelyn's place outside town. She used to bring us rolls wrapped in napkins when we were little. My mother trusted her." Daniel turned that over with the recording in his mind. "Your cleaning girl stays loyal." It fit too neatly. "If May overheard that meeting," he said, "she may have helped Rose hide copies before anyone could seize them." Nadia nodded. "And if Evelyn remembers that, May becomes the last living person outside us who might know where more things were moved." Victor looked toward the window, then back. "If those men are hunting her, we need to find her first." Daniel took out his phone again and called Mara. "I need any old payroll, domestic staffing, or vendor records tied to Evelyn's private residence," he said. "Anything with a May Collins attached. Tonight." Mara was quiet only a moment. "There's something," she said. "Not current. Old cash pay housekeeping through a service company Evelyn used to bypass formal hiring. I've got one address from years ago and, Daniel, a more recent note from forwarding records." He waited. "She was transferred last month to Willow Creek Assisted Living." Nadia's head came up at once. Mara continued, "And you're not the only one pulling that file. Someone else just opened it from a board office terminal." Daniel looked at Nadia, and this time neither of them needed a full conversation to understand what came next. If someone from the board office was already pulling May Collins's file, they were behind, but not by much. Irene could keep the children safe for an hour or 2. Marisol had the originals and the repaired audio chain. The question now was speed. Nadia reached for her coat before Daniel even said the words. Victor straightened from the window. "I know Willow Creek," he said. "Old assisted living place near the river bypass." Daniel nodded once. "Then we leave now." The drive out felt longer than it should have, mostly because every red light seemed personal. Nadia sat in front with May's name written on a scrap from Mara's text, folded and refolded between her fingers until the paper softened. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel and the other close to his phone, watching for new messages, new calls, any signal that the ground had shifted again. Victor followed in his truck, headlights steady in the mirror behind them. The city had thinned by then into quieter roads, medical offices gone dark, low apartment blocks, and the broad river road where street lamps reflected in streaks across wet pavement. Nobody in the car spoke much. The urgency had moved past talking. Willow Creek stood at the end of a curved drive lined with trimmed shrubs and one tired fountain no longer running. The building itself was clean, beige, and almost aggressively calm. The kind of place designed to look reassuring from the outside. Soft lobby lights glowed through the glass doors. A television flickered silently in the common room beyond the reception desk. Daniel parked close and they went in fast enough to draw attention, but not so fast it looked like panic. The lobby smelled of furniture polish, soup from the dining hall,
and that faint medicinal air every long-term care place seems to carry, no matter how warmly it is decorated. A night receptionist looked up from her computer. She was middle-aged, reading glasses low on her nose, and had the alert expression of someone who had seen too many people arrive with urgent family matters that turned out to be messes she did not want in her lobby. "Can I help you?" she asked. Nadia stepped forward. "We need to see May Collins. Right now, please." The woman checked the monitor. "Visiting hours are over." Daniel placed a card on the desk. "This can't wait." She looked at the card, then at his face, then at Nadia's, and saw something serious enough to stop being procedural. "There was already someone asking for her," she said. The words hit like a dropped tray. Daniel felt Nadia's whole posture sharpen beside him. "When?" he asked. "About 20 minutes ago. A woman first, very polished, said she was an old employer. Then a gentleman joined her later." The receptionist frowned at the screen. "They were taken up briefly, but Ms. Collins became agitated and asked staff to remove them. She's resting now." Daniel did not need names. He already knew. Evelyn would never go herself unless the stakes felt immediate. That alone told him how dangerous the recovered recording was. Nadia leaned in. "Please, I just need 5 minutes with her before they come back." The receptionist hesitated only a second longer. Then she buzzed the interior door. "Second floor, room 212. If the charge nurse stops you, tell her Ms. Harper cleared it." They were halfway to the elevator when the charge nurse intercepted them anyway, a broad-shouldered woman in navy scrubs carrying a medication cart. She looked ready to block them until May Collins's name was repeated, and Nadia said, "My mother was Rosevale." That changed it into a kind of recognition. "She's upset," the nurse said. "That woman downstairs brought up old work, and Ms. Collins doesn't handle pressure well anymore." Nadia answered, "Then she knows why I'm here." The nurse held her gaze a moment, then stepped aside. May Collins was smaller than Nadia remembered. She sat in a high-backed chair by the window with a blanket over her knees and a paperback open upside down in her lap. Her hair was white now and thinned close to the scalp, but her eyes were still quick. When Nadia stepped into the room and said her name softly, May turned, blinked twice, and then lifted a trembling hand to her mouth. "Rosie's girl," she whispered. The room went still around that phrase. Daniel stayed just inside the door. Victor remained in the hall out of respect and caution. Nadia crossed to May in 3 steps and knelt beside her chair, and all the years between them seemed to collapse inward. "It's me," she said. May touched her face as if confirming by skin what memory had already told her. "You look like her around the eyes." There are moments when questions must wait because recognition itself is the first truth. Daniel let that one breathe. Then May looked past Nadia and saw him. Whatever softness had been in her face tightened at once. "That one's a Rourke," she said, not a question. Nadia nodded. "Yes, he's helping me now." May gave a short, dry laugh. "Helping is late for them." Daniel accepted that, too. "You're right," he said, "but I'm here anyway." May studied him longer than Daniel expected, then looked back to Nadia. "They came from my little metal box," she said. "The woman and the man with her. Thought I still had it." Nadia's breath caught. "Evelyn and Gerald?" May nodded once. "She told me your mother had become confused at the end and asked whether I wanted to clear up old misunderstandings before I died. I told her to leave my room." A flicker of pride crossed the old woman's face. "Still can do that much." Nadia almost smiled through the strain. "The box is gone from the church." May's fingers gripped the blanket. "Good. Then someone got there before them." Daniel stepped closer. "We found the copies and a damaged recording." May's eyes went to him sharply. "The meeting tape?" "Yes." "Then you know she said it," May whispered. "Your aunt. Right there in the pantry after Rose left the room for water." She said, "If the claim drags long enough, hunger will finish what fire began." Nadia bowed her head for 1 second,
and Daniel felt the sentence like a blow to the sternum. May reached under the blanket then, fumbling at the side pocket of the chair until she found a small cloth pouch tied shut with kitchen string. "I kept one thing separate," she said, "just in case the others were found." Her hand shook as she offered it to Nadia. "Rose made me promise this wouldn't go to a lawyer first. She said it had to reach her daughter when the daughter could understand what choosing meant." Nadia took the pouch. Inside was a folded photograph and a notarized statement signed by May Collins but never filed anywhere. Across the bottom, in a witness line, was a second signature, Malcolm Rourke. Nobody spoke for a few seconds after Nadia unfolded the statement and saw Malcolm Rourke's signature. May watched them with tired, alert eyes from her chair, as if she had waited years for this exact silence to fall around someone else instead of her. The paper trembled only once in Nadia's hands before she steadied it against her knee and read again. Daniel leaned closer, reading upside down from where he stood. It was not a confession. It was a notarized witness statement prepared by May after the meeting at Evelyn's house, recording what she had heard through the pantry door and what Rose had shown her afterward. Copies of hazard notices, proof of prior complaints, and Evelyn's threats about starving the claim until the children were old enough to forget justice. At the bottom, Malcolm's signature sat on a line marked "Witness to receipt, not agreement." He had seen it. He had acknowledged it. He had known before the final denial was issued. Daniel felt something inside him go very still. Still. The kind of stillness that comes when a last doubt dies. He had looked directly at a warning, a plea, a witness statement, and moved ahead anyway. Nadia kept reading, lips parted slightly, breath shallow. Victor took one step farther into the room, hat crushed in both hands. May spoke first. "He came 2 days later," she said. "Your father, alone. Said he wanted to collect whatever Rose had put in writing so the lawyers could review it cleanly. I told him I didn't have the originals. That was true. Rose had already split everything 3 ways by then." Daniel turned toward her. "3 ways?" May nodded. "Mrs. Hensley kept one set. I kept one. Rose kept one until she couldn't trust the apartment anymore." Nadia closed her eyes briefly. "And he signed this?" May gave a sad little shrug. "He thought it was an inventory acknowledgement, or pretended he did. He was always careful to read only what helped him." That line cut. The charge nurse tapped lightly at the open door and reminded them they had only a few more minutes before late rounds. Daniel nodded thanks, then asked May the question that mattered most now. "Did you ever give this to anyone else?" May shook her head. "No. After Rose died, I got scared. I put it away. I told myself I was waiting until the right time. Truth is, I was old and poor and tired, and your aunt still had people who knew where I lived." Nadia reached out then and took May's hand. "You kept it anyway," she said. May squeezed back with surprising strength. "I kept it because your mother was right." Hunger can erase more than memory if people in charge are patient enough. Daniel heard the echo of Evelyn's threat behind that sentence and knew there would be no quiet settlement now, no internal smoothing, no discreet check that made the ugliness manageable. The evidence had crossed a line. So had he. On the way out of Willow Creek, Daniel called Mara again from the elevator. "Wake the outside counsel," he said. "Not tomorrow. Now. And I want a litigation hold issued across every parent company archive, board terminal, and personal residence staff server tied to Evelyn or old property redevelopment records. Everything freezes tonight." Mara did not ask whether that was too extreme. She heard something in his voice and simply answered, "I'm on it." Nadia stood beside him in the elevator, statement folded inside her mother's envelope, recorder drive clipped inside her pocket, shoulders drawn but steady. She looked like someone holding too many years in both arms and refusing to drop any of them. They did not return to the apartment directly. Daniel knew too much had shifted for that. Instead, he called the family attorney he trusted least, little, and the independent one he trusted more. The second answered. Anna Mercer, all business, even half asleep, listened to his compressed summary in silence. Hazard notices. Witness statements, audio recording, family interference, search pressure on a surviving witness. Then she said, "Do not put any of this in cloud storage you don't control. Bring originals to my office suite, now. I'll open emergency protective filings and prepare preservation notices before dawn." Daniel glanced at Nadia. She nodded once. So they changed course again. Anna Mercer's office occupied the top floor of a converted brick building that still smelled faintly of old wood beneath the modern paint. She met them in slacks and a sweater, hair pulled back. No theater in her expression at all, only the sober attention of someone who understood the weight of paper and timing. She spread the materials across a long table, scanned the notarized statement, listened to the cleaned audio excerpt through headphones, and exhaled through her nose. "This is enough to threaten people who have been comfortable for a very long time," she said. "Which means they will try one of two things before morning: discredit the witness chain, or make this look like a personal extortion attempt by a financially desperate employee." Nadia's face did not flinch at that last phrase. She had lived too close to that accusation for years already. Anna looked directly at Daniel. "If you are in, you are all the way in. There is no halfway public integrity with family scandals. They will ask whether the waitress manipulated you. They will ask whether guilt made you reckless. They will ask whether you are mentally fit to lead the company if you expose it to damages." Daniel answered without hesitation. "Let them ask." Anna gave a small nod. "Good. Then we move before they do." She outlined the first steps quickly. Sworn affidavit from Nadia, protective statement from May tomorrow if her physician clears it, forensic recovery certification from Marisol, preservation order served on the parent company at opening bell, independent board session demanded under emergency governance rules. And one more thing. "You need to decide tonight," Anna said, "whether you're confronting Evelyn privately first or walking into the boardroom with this and letting her hear the tape in front of everyone." That question settled over the room like weather. Victor quietly excused himself then, saying he'd go check on the truck and get coffee from the all-night place downstairs. It was less an errand than a kindness. Some choices belong to fewer people than a room contains. Nadia stood by the window after he left, looking down at the wet streetlights and the dark storefront across from the office. Daniel stayed near the table, one hand resting beside the papers bearing his father's name. "What do you want?" he asked her. Nadia did not turn right away. "My whole life," she said softly, "people with money decided where the truth should be said and how loud it was allowed to be." Then she faced him. "I don't want another closed room." Daniel absorbed that. No private absolutions, no family-only reckoning. Anna watched both of them, saying nothing. Nadia stepped back to the table and placed her mother's envelope on top of the spread evidence with an almost ceremonial calm. "If she hears it," Nadia said, "she hears it where she cannot call me emotional and dismiss me into silence." Anna looked at Daniel. "Then the boardroom." He nodded, and just as she reached for her phone to start the emergency notice chain, Mara called again, her voice lower than before. "Daniel? One of the board members got there before us. Evelyn has already called an executive meeting for 7 a.m. She says it's about your judgment." By 7 that morning, the boardroom no longer felt like a place where polished people discussed abstract risk. It felt like a room that had been prepared for a lie and was about to receive a living answer. The long table gleamed under recessed lights. Coffee sat untouched beside leather folders. City rain streaked the windows behind the board seats, turning the skyline gray and wavering. Evelyn Rourke was already there, immaculate as ever, one hand resting on a stack of briefing papers she clearly intended to control the morning with. Two board members sat near her with the closed expressions of people who had come ready to choose reputation over discomfort. Gerald Pike was not in the room, but his kind of language still lingered in the air like stale cologne. Daniel entered with Anna Mercer at his side, Victor behind them carrying a sealed document case, and Nadia a step farther back, not hidden, not apologetic, simply present. That alone changed the balance of the room. Evelyn looked at her once and said, "So you brought theater?" Daniel set his folder down and answered, "I brought the person your decisions were built on." No one sat immediately. Anna distributed copies of the preservation order, the notarized statement, the recovered hazard notices, and the transcript excerpts Marisol had worked through before dawn. Then Daniel placed the small recorder in the center of the table. That drew every eye in the room. Evelyn's face did not collapse. She was too trained for that. But something in it thinned. "This meeting," Daniel said, "is about what this company and this family did to the Vale family. What was known before the bakery fire and what was buried after it." One board member started to interrupt with a warning about legal exposure. Daniel cut him off. "Legal exposure has already happened. You inherited it." So did she. He did not need to point at Nadia. Everyone knew where she was standing. Then he pressed play. This time the room heard enough. Rosevale's tired voice, Evelyn's colder one, the line about avoiding written acknowledgement, the threat about dragging the claim until the children forgot what justice looked like. The damaged sections mattered less now than the unmistakable truth around them. After the audio stopped, the silence was so complete that even the rain seemed louder. Daniel laid Malcolm's witness statement beside the recorder. "My father saw this. My aunt heard this. The company proceeded anyway." Evelyn's voice, when it came, was low and furious. "You naive boy. Do you think morality feeds payroll? Do you think lenders reward honesty? We kept the structure standing." Nadia spoke before Daniel could. "You kept the name standing," she said. "You let the rest burn." It was the first time she had addressed the whole room, and because she did not shout, because she did not plead, they had to hear every word. She spoke about the bakery, the bus rides, the rent envelopes, the rules she broke to bring home food, and the children who had grown up learning to make one loaf last 2 days. She did not perform pain, she accounted for it. That was worse for them. One of the older board members, a man who had said almost nothing until then, removed his glasses and looked not at Daniel, but at the papers. "Is this independently preserved?" he asked Anna. "Yes." "Witnessed?" "Yes." "Recoverable in court?" "Very likely." He put the glasses back on and turned to Evelyn. "Then we are not discussing whether something wrong occurred. We are discussing whether we continue to attach ourselves to it." The vote that followed was frightened, late, and practical. But it was enough. Evelyn was removed from all board authority pending investigation. Gerald Pike's consulting privileges were terminated before noon. A formal restitution fund was created that day, beginning with the Vale family claim plus accumulated damages, educational trusts for Owen, Lila, and Benji, housing stabilization, and full legal support for Nadia's guardianship petition. Daniel signed the resolution first. Then, in a move no one in that room had expected, he announced a second measure. An employee emergency fund, an internal review office, run outside the family chain, with Nadia offered a permanent role once she chose it. Because the company had proved exactly what happens when the people carrying it are never truly seen. The days after that moved quickly and deeply. The court granted Nadia emergency guardianship, then full legal status over the children once the filings were complete. Owen got his school shoes, and later a scholarship interview he did not miss because he was stocking freezers after class. Lila entered the art program whose forms had once sat hidden under unpaid bills. Benji, who had learned early to count bread slices, began leaving library books open all over the apartment because he no longer thought every good thing had to be saved unopened. Irene remained close, more family than coworker now, the kind people earn by showing up before they are asked. And Daniel kept doing the less dramatic work too. Rent paid through the proper channels. May Collins's care guaranteed quietly and permanently. Mrs. Hensley brought into protected deposition, with dignity, not pressure. Marisol retained to preserve every damaged file, repair with paperwork, signatures, and follow-through. the kind that does not sparkle, but holds. Months later, Nadia stood in a brighter office than any room she had ever worked in before, reviewing staff hardship applications with a reading lamp on and a kettle steaming softly in the corner. On the shelf behind her sat the blue bakery tin, emptied now, cleaned but still dented, because some containers stop being storage and become proof. Down the hall, Daniel was arguing with finance over why emergency transport vouchers should be approved faster. In the evening, both of them would leave work and go where their real lives waited. At home, the children were setting the table. Just setting it. Forks, bowls, mismatched cups, the ordinary music of a house beginning to trust tomorrow. Owen had burned one side of the bread under the broiler and laughed instead of panicking. Lila had paint on her thumb. Benji had left a school notice under a magnet shaped like a lemon and forgotten to mention it because forgotten things were no longer disasters by default. Some ruins stay empty for decades because everyone agrees not to touch them. But sometimes the truest repair begins when one person finally opens the locked place, carries the box into daylight, and refuses to call ashes the natural end of the story. That night after dinner, Nadia washed flour from her hands at the kitchen sink, while the children argued softly over whose turn it was to dry the plates. On the windowsill, a small basil plant leaned toward the glass, green and alive in a chipped ceramic pot, and the room smelled faintly of warm bread.